Good morning, members. It is, according to that clock, at least 10 o'clock. This is the Planning Committee for Friday, the 19th of April. The first item on the agenda is apologies for absence. I think, actually, we ought perhaps to have a sort of list of apologies for being here, actually. There's Virginia Priestley, who unfortunately has to attend a funeral, Martin Beer, Andrew Hart, Matt Butler, Kath, who just joined us, has immediately had to leave us, I'm afraid, because of health problems of her family, and Ken Richardson, who is attending a meeting on on national park matters in Matlock. Could I welcome, whilst I'm here, Rachel Bennett. Welcome to the Planning Committee. I hope you find it interesting. If it's anything like my first meeting doing this, you'll be sitting there thinking, they're all talking rubbish and I'm not allowed to talk. But you'll be able to pick it up later. And we look forward to having you with us. So that's apologies. The minutes of the previous meeting have been circulated. Shouldn't we have been taking... Oh, there's the declarations of interest. Sorry. Okay, thank you. The minutes of the previous meeting. There are 3 points I'd just like to pick up, if I may. On page 9, the longish paragraph at the bottom of the page, I think that tries to express the reasons for the decision that we made. But I think the first point I think that we noted was that this was actually a very sheltered site and was not visible from anywhere outside the site itself. And I think that should be included within the reasons for the refusal. And I think rather than reducing the number of day visitors, so actually I don't think anybody believed that that was going to happen, what we were really doing was acknowledging that this was a form of accommodation that was increasingly popular and had to be provided for. Those, I think, were the two reasons that were taken on board. I think Eugene, first of all, raised that. Does that reasonably summarise what you were trying to say at the time? I think that's right. Can we make that sort of amendment to the minutes? Going further on from there, page 17, at the bottom of the page again, it says the motion to refuse the application was withdrawn. It was actually to approve the application, if we can make that alteration. And at the bottom of page 18, in relation to the Elton barn, it was deferred for further information, but I think we should make it clear that it was deferred for the structural report that would then enable us to establish what was necessary to secure the future of the building. And I think that should be clear in the minute. Are members happy with those amendments? On that basis, I move the minutes as a... Sorry? Mike?
Couple of more, well,
oh,
couple of more minor points.
Okay.
Also on page 18, we talk about grant funding available, and I think we probably mean grant funding.
Okay, yes.
Yeah. It'd be nice if grant funding was available.
£1,000.
It would pay for the whole thing.
And Ken, the point you're making?
Just on the title on 2924 on page 19, Chair, at the end of the first line, it refers to a building to Lamb House Sheen, which I think is a bit extravagant. I think it means sheep. Whilst I doubtless be accused of pedantry, I thought it was one that required changing.
Okay, is that it?
Yeah, that's it.
That's it. Okay, good, thanks very much. On those bases, I move that these minutes be approved as a correct record. Is that seconded? And all those in favour? Anyone against? That is carried. Right. No urgent business to be dealt with today. Public participation will occur as we go through the agenda. Members' declarations of interest. I will be declaring an interest in agenda item 6, Lilac Cottage, and I will leave the room when that comes on the agenda. And I should also record that I am a client of the NatWest Bank in Bakewell, and therefore I declare that as a personal interest. I'm advised it is not a prejudicial interest, so I shall remain during that item. Any other declarations of interest? Ken?
Chair, items 9 and 10, Jane Newman is known to me, and I would to a number of other members as well. Item 11, Andrew Critchlow, also a former member of the authority, is known to me. And item 12, Sir Richard Fitzherbert, is known to me without any, they're personal rather than any prejudicial interests.
Right, okay, yes. And actually, I should say that the bottom one, Hugh, if it's the same chap, Hugh Wright is somebody who I used to know it through the parish circuit. Right, on that basis, can we move then on to... Beg your pardon? I don't think there were, because no other hands went up. Okay. I'm going to now move on to agenda item 6, Lilac Cottage, Main Street, Taddington. Our vice chairman is not present with us today for good reasons. We therefore need a chairman for this item to chair this session whilst I'm out of the room. Dermot.
Chair, I'm happy to sit on that one, if you would like me to.
Well, somebody must propose that in that case. Jean, are you proposing it?
Yeah,
Is that
I'll
seconded
propose
by
that.
anybody? Is it seconded? No, it's not seconded. Oh, you're seconded. Okay. Any other nominations? In that case, Dermot, you'll have to take over.
Okay.
Move those there, get that out of the way.
Thank you. Thank you. Who's presenting this one? Adam. Right, okay, thank you. Thank you, everybody. My name's Dermot Murphy. This is the item for Lilac Cottage, and Adam is going to present this for us.
Thank you, Chair. This application was deferred from committee previously and has come back as is set out in the report. Lilac Cottage is a Grade 2 listed building located in Taddington. Members visited this site previously. The proposal is for replacement windows to the front end elevation there. That's a photograph of the building as it was in 1999. The application originally proposed to replace the mullions also, but that element of the application has been withdrawn, and the applicant intends to repair those mullions in the future now. So it is just the replacement of the windows now proposed. The existing windows, as you can see there, are double glazed, but they are unauthorised, and the proposal is to replace those windows with new double glazed windows with glazing bars that would be stuck onto the glass, as you can see on the plans there. That's the proposed sections. It shows the double glazing and the glazing bars. And you can see that's the general arrangement proposed for the windows. There's no objection to the general arrangement of a pane over a pane on each one. The issue is whether the proposed double glazing and materials and the detailing is acceptable. So officers' view, as set out in the report, is that, as before, the double glazed windows would fundamentally alter the appearance of the historic building. The proposals would harm the significance of the listed building, and the officers' view is that this harm wouldn't be outweighed by public benefits. Officers have discussed secondary glazing with the applicant, but that isn't proposed here. The application is still for double glazing. But officers of the view is that secondary glazing would work and would deliver similar benefits in terms of conservation and energy without the harm of the double glazing. So the application is still recommended for refusal as set out in the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Adam. Members, questions? Oh, sorry, got to speak, sorry.
Yeah, so let's see.
Oh, sorry, okay. Sorry, I missed you there. Sorry, would you like to speak?
Thank you.
I'm only applying to replace the rotting and drafty old softwood frames and casements with hardwood and the two-pane per casement design described in the Historic England listing, without damaging any of the historic fabric, but incorporating energy-efficient double glazing that will reduce the carbon footprint of the property to follow government net zero policy. The officers have informed me that they have no objection to the two-pane arrangement. The visual impact would be minimal, if any. The cottage with front garden is set back from the footpath and road and would not impact on the streetscape. Climate change and global warming are real. Climate change legislation applies to us all. My heating, my hot water and cooking is all using fossil fuels, affecting global warming. The outstanding matter is the proposed double glazing and the glazing bar, which is technically necessary to give the maximum thermal efficiency possible to be compatible with current building regulations. Your officers have previously suggested thicker curtains, thin 6mm double glazing and secondary glazing. Thicker curtains would have a negligible impact on the carbon footprint of a rubble-built stone cottage with limited roof insulation. No officer has assessed the impact of their suggested secondary glazing on the inside of the windows, but it would have a negative visual effect both externally and the appearance internally, and would not achieve the necessary energy efficiency that could compromise the cottage's historic fabric. Slimline 6mm glazing units would only give a low level of thermal efficiency that would fall short of the guidelines that are part of net zero regulations for replacement windows. Historic England have advised me that the current windows at your property, I quote, are not historic, so we have no objection to replacement. We encourage owners to take the opportunity to choose replacement fittings that enhance the qualities of the building. If double glazing was of an appropriate style, it would be considered acceptable. Guidelines relating to climate change and historic buildings are under review. Government departments are consulting on removing barriers for adapting historic homes for energy efficiency. Your officers have views, but there is nothing regulatory to say that the type and style of double glazed windows I'm proposing cannot be approved by you as the local planning authority. All I'm applying to do is replace the existing rotting windows with windows similar to those at the time of listing, to conserve the internal and external appearance of the windows without damaging the fabric, and reduce my carbon footprint and impact on the environment by making my home more energy efficient.
Mr. Ryde, sorry, you've had your 3 minutes.
That's fine, that's great.
Thank you very
That's
much.
what I wanted to.
Can you switch off your... Right, members, questions?
I just want to mention that Chris Curtis, the Conservation Officer, is here as well
right.
for questions as well.
Any questions?
We're faced with, it seems to me, claim and counterclaim about the relative. Yeah, we appear to be faced with claim and counterclaim about the relative efficiency of double glazed units against secondary double glazing. I mean, personally, I think the idea of trying to use curtains is a bit of a no-no, unless one wishes to live in the dark during the day. The same with shutters. So I think it's either double glazing or secondary double glazing. I'm mindful as well that the existing windows, the ones that are being sought to, this application seeks to replace, are unauthorised. The authority, as I recall, invested in a set of most appropriate or more appropriate windows in the past, and those have been removed and so without permission. These are unauthorised. It's an opportunity for us to regularise that position, and what we grant aided in the past, I understand, were single glazed units. So we are looking for, I suppose, a like-for-like replacement in that sense. It's unfortunate that the current occupant has inherited, it would seem, unauthorised fenestration, but that's where we are. And I think we have to recognise that the treatment of designated buildings brings with it both a responsibility and a different approach to ordinary properties. The rules and regulations require, for example, like-for-like replacement, and as is laid out in the report, there's a requirement to consider improving the appearance of listed buildings. It's part of our statutory purpose to conserve and enhance the cultural heritage of the national park. I have sympathy with the applicant and his desire to reduce his carbon footprint, but I'm not convinced that the double glazing approach is the most appropriate. I think we should be considering secondary double glazing in order to meet both our previous investment to rectify the unauthorised works that have occurred in the past, and to meet the quite reasonable, sustainable ambitions of the applicant. Thank you, Chair.
I find myself really conflicted on this, but thinking back to 20 years ago, there was a lot more scepticism around issues of climate change, and the fossil fuel companies were actively running disinformation campaigns. And I can well imagine at the time that conservation and planning officers were feeling that, you know, providing the grant monies to have the secondary glazing installed was the best way forward. But we do know the situation is serious. We've had the heaviest rainfall this winter. Normally I'd be right behind the planning officers over this, but this applicant is doing his best to minimise carbon emissions by making the most of the heating and the property. So I'm fast coming to the view that we really need to review some of our planning measures in the light of what we now know about climate change. But I appreciate that goes against officers' advice here.
Thanks for that, Mike. Bill, did you want to say something?
Yeah, equally, thank you for those two contributions. I sort of agree with all that both of you have said, really. So I mean, it sounds like an edition of The Apprentice list, doesn't it? But you know, I'm very conflicted as well. And I you know, I agree with your comments. I mean, it's a very difficult one. I think, given the history of the site, I would tend to go with Ken's view on the importance of sticking to what we need to do. I'm also very mindful of the applicant's right and desire to insulate their property, which I think is very important as well.
Thank you for that. Jean?
Thank you, Chairman. Again, I totally agree with both the things that you've said, and it's very, very difficult, and I'm sorry for being repetitive. But I'm afraid I'm going with I'm swaying towards Mike's opinion and the things that he's actually said. I think the person that's applying is trying his absolute best to do the best that he can do. And I've read in the notes here that there is double glazing has been replaced, have been approved at, and I know we can't take into consideration other places, but that has swayed me slightly. So I'm sort of in the opinion that I would like to move this for approval. And again, I understand both concerns, and I understand that it's setting a precedence, which I know is going to be sort of critical by some people.
Thanks, Jean. Anybody like to second that? Okay, thank you. Would you like to speak?
Very conflicted. But I think the benefit, I don't think the appearance will be that detrimental to the building, is my point on it. I think clearly they're talking about English heritage. You've got pictures of the windows previously, which I did try and find online, but I couldn't find them actually. I can't see that this is going to make that much a difference in the appearance of the building. From these Georgian style looking windows that aren't original to having actually more what the original windows used to look like, and making it more energy efficient, and that's where I'm. Thank you.
Ken.
Thank you, Chair. If I could have the second bite of the cherry. It's just to make clear, I'm not against the energy efficiency proposals in principle or for themselves. What I am saying is that what is being proposed is not the most appropriate way forward. That secondary double glazing, which I think could be as effective, would be the most appropriate, not double glazing. Not least because what we're looking at is stick on. We're not looking at proper windows. We're looking at bits of plastic stuck onto glass, and we're talking about treating a listed building with stick-on plastic, as it said on those illustrations that were on the screen. We have a responsibility to care for our designated heritage assets. Is where I'm coming from.
Thanks, Ken. Mike?
Chair, notwithstanding what Ken's saying just now, and we appreciate that it is a Grade 2 listed building, but I can see that the applicant is unhappy at the assertion that it's effectively stick-on plastic that is going onto the double glazing. But
Yeah, they are stick-on glazing bars, but they're made out of wood. Timber's proposed, not plastic. Yeah.
Bill.
Just a question for the planning officers, because obviously this case is sort of hanging in the balance. But what I want to know is about precedent. That obviously, if this is approved, then there's a concern that that other buildings may not receive the protection that they deserve or they need. I'm just wondering whether, each case is considered on its merits, but there is a general concern that, once you start allowing a certain type of development, then that becomes the norm.
Jean.
Can I just comment that I think that's slightly different because they're already there. So it's like replacing like for like, but again, that is my opinion.
To the point about they are already there, but they're not authorised. They were never granted listed building consent from officers' point of view. So we look back to what is the authorised position, and that is single glazed traditional windows. So the point was made earlier about Historic England. Our advice, our view is that the lawful position is that there are traditional single glazed windows in the building, and these windows are not authorised. So we shouldn't be giving them that much weight. Hang on. In terms of Councillor Hanley's question, I am concerned a little bit about precedent. Yes, each case is determined on its own merits, you're right, and we wouldn't necessarily point to this every time we had an application for replacement windows. But where there are existing traditional windows and applicants came in for conventional double glazing with stick-on glazing bars, I think it's possible that applicants may point to a decision here, but as officers, we would still make the same recommendation.
Jean? No, not a problem,
I
Jean.
totally understand what you're saying, but I think, again, this is me, I think this is slightly different, because if somebody come and they wanted double glazing and they didn't have it, you would say, no, it's traditional, it's grade 2, it's got to be done. But it's already there. And that's what's swaying me, is that it's a replacement. And I know everything that you've explained.
Thanks, Jean, for that.
One point that wasn't teased out, and the applicants asserted that these are more energy efficient than secondary glazing would be, and so it would be useful if we're going to have these cases coming in future to have some empirical evidence available, so that will back up that position or refute it. But we have our conservation officer here who may be able to shed some light.
I can't offer any empirical evidence before me now, but I can offer to send round a Historic England training video on windows, if you would like. It's about an hour long, and it explains whole life carbon cycles. So that's not just the operational phase of the window, where having very thick double glazing probably would be more efficient than slimline double glazing or secondary glazing. But when you take into account the fact that double glazed units tend to fail usually within about 30 years, and then you have to remake more glass, which is a very energy intensive process, Historic England would contend that traditional single glazing and secondary glazing is overall a more environmentally friendly approach in terms of whole life carbon cost. So that's manufacturer, disposal and operation. So if you would like, for general educational purposes, I can send around a link to this Historic England webinar on glazing, if that would help.
I think it would. It also changes the dynamic too, doesn't it? Because it, although it does rely on the person who has the secondary glazing installed to maintain the wooden window frames so that they don't, so they do have to be painted periodically to stop them, or to have some kind of wood preservative to stop them rotting.
That's very true. And no windows are maintenance free, even UPVC ones. So that's undoubtedly true. This is true for listed buildings in general. They generally have a higher maintenance burden than, say, a new house.
So has that been factored in?
To the whole life cost? Well, I would think so. I mean, if you don't paint your windows, then they might rot, and then you would have to replace them sooner. That's true. Look at the windows we're replacing. They were put in about 20 years ago, I believe.
Right. I personally haven't got an issue with these double glazed units. I've been on projects and seen the benefits and the downside of not putting double glazed units into buildings in conservation areas. Condensation running down the walls, brand new sash windows. They're only allowed to put, not in the Peak Park, it's in Derbyshire Dales, and condensation running down walls. We hold ourselves up as champions of of net zero and things we're trying to do. The climate's changing and whatever. I take on Lee's point that, to be honest, when we went on a site visit previously, you couldn't really tell the windows were double glazed or whatever. The parish council have no objections. I think it's the most efficient way to actually, reduce sort of heat loss and whatever. More often than not, I've noticed, you know, secondary glazing more than I would, in a unit. And to be honest, you need 6mm thermal breaks. They're not that efficient. You know, I was always told you need a minimum of 10 to to get the sort of efficiency that you require. So right, we'll go to the vote and we'll see what people say. But I do also note that there's an application further down the agenda, Corner Cottage. I know that has to be judged differently. That's already a listed building, and it's already got double glazing, and there's nobody, to my knowledge, sort of making an issue about that. But the application isn't about double glazing because it's already there. So I don't know if we have approved that or somebody's actually installed that off their own bat. But anyway, I think we're at a stage where we should really move to the vote. Right. Oh, sorry, we've got a recommendation for approval of this application. Yeah, so there's a motion to approve. So can we have the vote, please? All those in favour? All those against? Any abstentions? That's carried. Thank you very much.
Next item on the agenda is agenda items 7 and 8, planning application and listed building application at Stony Closes. That's right, isn't it?
No, just 7.
It's just 7. It's the next one. Okay. It's agenda item 7, planning application at Stony Close, Bakewell. Mr. Swindle, and who's introducing it? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Before I go through the presentations, there's just a couple of updates. There's an error in the report at paragraphs 13 and 79, which references raising the eaves and ridge height of the two-storey barn, which is Unit 4. That's incorrect, as I mentioned on the site visit. There is no proposal now to raise the roof height of that building, as you'll see on the plans. And secondly, the proposed carport, it was confirmed on the site visit yesterday that that has been omitted from the application now. So we will quickly go through the plans for that, but that is no longer part of the application. So Stony Close's farm is a traditional historic farmstead located just on the southern edge of Bakewell, as you can see there. Stony Close comes down and into Bakewell Junior School, and at the end of Stony Close there is a track which winds into the site. At the bottom left, or the bottom of the site there to the left, you can see is the farmhouse, and then a range of traditional buildings and some other more modern buildings which enclose a yard, as we saw yesterday. See it a bit clearer there. The proposal is to convert the farmstead to a total of 6 dwellings, which would include the farmhouse. So there would be 5 new dwellings, and they are numbered 1 to 7. So Unit 5 there would be the building being demolished for a carport. So the other units are shown there. So this is the proposed layout. So you've got Stony Close to the north, and then the Methodist School, and you can see there's a new access road in Tarmac Road with a turning head at the bottom, and there'll be pavement on one side and then flipping over to the other side. And at the bottom of that turning head there would be an access in, and then up at the road where the existing track comes in there would be a new road formed. And both of those, well, all three of those new access roads, there would be parking to the various units. And as you can see, the parts of the existing fields would be subdivided to gardens with new walling and planting. And then obviously the buildings are being retained, as you can see on the plan. So these are the existing buildings, which we saw yesterday on site. This is proposed Unit 2. You see an existing traditional single-storey barn constructed from limestone under a slate roof. And again, Unit 3, which is next to Unit 2, so Unit 2 is just on the left. There's some interesting car openings here with gritstone detailing. And then this is the 2-storey barn, which I mentioned before is no longer proposed to be increased in height. Again, you can see an attractive traditional barn. This is a modern building which was proposed to be demolished. This was originally proposed to be replaced with a carport, but that, as I say, has been omitted. This is Unit 6, which is again a more modern building, 20th century building, albeit clad with stone, and that's proposed to be converted to a dwelling as well. And then you've got another single-storey barn on the other side of the yard, which is proposed to be extended and converted to another dwelling. So I'll just flick through these plans as quickly as I can. So this is the existing farmhouse plan, and here's the proposed. So the proposal for the farmhouse is for a conservatory extension and to convert a outbuilding at the back to an office and store. There is a garage indicated on the plans as well, but we don't have any elevation drawings for that. So that's the existing elevation, and that's the proposed conservatory. And that faces you as you enter the site on the existing track. And this is the view from the rear with the proposed conservatory. And that's the building at the back, which should be converted with using existing openings. And then again at the back. This is the first new dwelling, first 2 new dwellings, which are called Units 2 and 3. So you can see this is a single-storey building. It's a T-shape, and that would be converted to 2 dwellings. There is an extension proposed, a single-storey extension on the far side. So that's at the junction between the single-storey building and the 2-storey building. And as you can see, it would be converted to 2 two-bedroom dwellings. So that's the existing elevation, as we saw on site, and that's the proposed. So it's mentioned in the report, Crittall-style windows is mentioned in the report a number of times, and this is what they look like. So they're essentially glazed metal framed openings, which would be in the large opening. So this opening here in the middle would be opened up to form one, and then a new door would be formed in that opening there. The side. Again, proposed a new doorway, Crittall opening style. This is the new extension. So there's 2-storey bar on the left. So this is looking from the back. There's a new extension with a pair of French doors. And this is the back of Units 2 and 3. Existing, quite overgrown. And you can see they'll be using the existing opening on the left and a new doorway on the see the new extension there, gable on, and then a two-storey barn in the background there. It's the existing floor plan for the two-storey barn. And then that's the proposed. So ground floor would be living accommodation and a bedroom. Existing small lean-to on this side would be extended to create a utility room. Upstairs, another 3 bedrooms and bathroom would be provided by subdividing the space. And this is the existing elevation as you look from the yard. And the proposed, as you can see, there's no proposal to raise the roof height. Again, circle style opening and 2 new window openings either side. And then the other opening would be reused. The existing gable, 2-storey barn with its small lean-to, which would be extended, as you can see there, and a new window at first floor level. And to the rear, there's a tin curved sheet building which will be removed. And the building again will be converted. That's again, you can see the new extension to the side, a new door and existing opening, and then a new window at first floor. And then actually that's the rebuilt lean-to on that side with a new door. That's the existing gable where there's proposed to be an extension, and that's proposed. So the existing window would be blocked off, and that extension would be built there. This is the proposed carport, which, as I say, is now omitted. It was a single-storey timber building. This is the more modern 20th century building, which would be converted to a 3-bedroom dwelling. And as you can see, we're reusing the existing openings, and crystal-style openings. New opening in the far side. And finally, Unit 7, which is a single-storey building, would be converted and extended. So there's an element on this end which will be rebuilt with a new bay, and then there'll be an extension off the back, which you can see there, which would be a single-bedroom dwelling. And that's the existing elevation to the front, and that's proposed and say the rebuilt extension to the left, and then with the openings reused with new fenestration, and the back. Proposed extension and the rebuild with another critical style opening. So, as set out in the report, development is acceptable in principle, and evidence has been submitted with the application to demonstrate that it would not be viable to deliver affordable housing. However, officers have significant concerns about the scheme. As set out in the report, a satisfactory heritage statement hasn't been submitted. An officer's view is that the application doesn't demonstrate the significance of the buildings, and therefore the design isn't informed by that assessment. The proposed conversion of Unit 6, that's a relatively modern 20th century building of no historic or architectural significance, and therefore there's concerns about whether the conversion of that building is acceptable in principle or whether there's another solution which would be better for the historic farmstead. And the scheme as a whole includes various extensions and alterations which, in officer's view, and views conservation officer, would harm the character and appearance of the group. And I suppose more fundamentally, I'll go back to the general layout plan in a minute once I've finished, but the proposed access and extensive gardens would domesticate the buildings and the surrounding fields and fundamentally harm the setting of the group. And it's important just finally to stress that officers have raised these issues on several occasions, in this application and a previous application, but they remain unresolved to date. Therefore, the application is recommended for refusal for the reasons set out in the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. We have one speaker, Mr. David Oulsnam. Oh, it's to be read out, is it? Okay. Me?
Thank you, Chair. This is a statement from the agent for Stony Closes Farm. The conservation and archaeology comments have been addressed with substantial additional information submitted on the 3rd of November, providing historic maps of the site, plus reports on each building with reference to any historic heritage assets. It also emphasises the steps taken to respect the heritage significance of the farmstead. The planning report states that the harm identified will be less than substantial. The structural report also confirms the suitability of the buildings for conversion. Design considerations: 1. Farmhouse extension and conversion, accepted design. 2. Single-storey barn with no extension, accepted design. 3. Single-storey infill barn with single-storey extension to the rear of the two-storey barn. 4. We can reconsider this extension as a smaller extension with a lean-to roof. 4. The raising of the eaves seems to be the main problem, but we submitted drawing number 17A on the 3rd of November, which included for the roof retained at the existing level. 5. We shall remove the carport building. 6. The 1950s stone-built barn is a traditional building forming an enclosure to the south of the cobbled courtyard. This, although being a later addition, forms part of the agricultural setting of the range of farm buildings. It has an interesting metal truss roof structure with a corrugated sheet roof and existing metal-framed windows on both sides of the building, which can be retained as part of the design. This building should therefore be retained as an integral part of the existing setting within the landscape. 7. This is a small single-storey detached stone barn which encloses the courtyard when viewed from the west. A small single-storey extension is added to provide the main living area, which would not detract from the overall traditional detailing of the original building. Door and window designs can be addressed. The stone boundary walls can be relocated to the south to reduce the garden areas to each property along with parking and landscaping. In summary, most of the consultation requirements have been established. Concerns on the heritage and design can be addressed, and if the application could be deferred, we could then aim to have the outstanding points resolved with the planning officer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm struggling a bit with this at the moment. The reason for refusal is based upon our understanding of the plans as they are now. But a theme running through this report is that we don't have enough information. And I'm wondering whether that actually is not the starting point in any reason for refusal that might be considered. Because if we don't understand what we're dealing with and we can't get that information, now we seem to have a conflict of evidence because we've just heard information has been provided. We as members don't know what that is. It seemed to me from the site visit yesterday that there were one or two buildings there with some very interesting features that we need to know more about and so on. I don't even know from this report how old some of these buildings are or what they're about or anything. So I'm having some difficulty in understanding what it is we're setting off against the conservation elements. Do you see what I mean? Would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, I think it's a good point, and I think part of the issue is the lack of information that we've received, and once I've finished I'll let Chris come in and give his views on that, because he's been giving us feedback on the information that has been provided. The applicant has provided some information which we have looked at and we've consulted conservation on throughout the application, but yes, fundamentally there is a lack of understanding of the buildings, their function, their age and their details, and that's one of the fundamental issues, is that our view is that this design hasn't taken that first step of understanding the significance and then designed the scheme around that. So, I mean, if members, I understand the point about that step, and I think if members were minded, or depending on what members are minded to do, if members were minded to refuse the application, it would be reasonable to put that in, to add that to the start of the reasons for refusal, and that there is a lack of information. Because that is a policy requirement.
I mean, it does seem to me that with this application, you know, the expression, you can't make an omelette without cracking a few eggs. There have got to be some compromises here to conserve what is obviously something very important. But I can't work out what's important and what isn't at the moment. Members, Mike, and then Ken.
Thank you, Chair. I can see from this site there is some potential there to do something really good,
Yes.
and to preserve a lot of the historical features. But I do think that the lack of a more detailed heritage statement certainly concerns I've got over the rather large windows over what were basically barn doors at one time. is a concern, whether that was the right way forward. I just don't think we can accept this in its present form, but I think we would want to encourage the applicant to come back and to work together with officers on coming up with something that would be more acceptable in the landscape.
Are you proposing something there, or?
Yeah, I'm proposing that we go with the officer recommendation, but that we put some comments in to encourage the applicant to
Provide the heritage information.
and to work with officers on coming up with something that would be more acceptable.
Okay, Ken?
Thank you, Chair. Mike has expressed the tenor of my feelings. I did look at the most recent heritage statement, and in my opinion, it's inadequate, completely inadequate, because the whole point of those documents is supposed to be that it analyses the buildings, it identifies what their previous functions were, when they were built relative to one another. It assesses what the impacts of the proposals are on that understanding, and how in the course of development those impacts will be mitigated. They'll be reduced to as much of a minimum as possible. And there's none of that in the heritage statement. And as a result, we've got for Unit 3, for example, which is a very, to my mind, just from the side visit, is an interesting element with blocked cart doors, yet the proposal and the element in the top centre photograph shows the original structure, and then to the right, the top right photograph shows the subsequent blocking of the the wagon space. The proposal before us is to knock out the original bit that's in the central photograph, which is, to my mind, wholly unacceptable. I think the use of crittle windows is an abomination, frankly. It just isn't in the spirit of how one takes and sensitively develops a non-designated heritage asset. The whole point of, to my mind, of using development to conserve properties like this is that you retain the character and as much as possible of the original, so that it can still be identified once that development has taken place. And what's being proposed is almost wholly contrary to that approach. And I, as Adam has already raised, I would seriously question the eligibility of Unit 6 as a 1950s relatively modern agricultural building. Our policies are all about conserving designated and non-designated heritage assets, and with the best will in the world, even though I am a cultural heritage person, I can't see Unit 6 as a non-designated heritage asset. So I think that seriously needs to be looked at. I think Mike is right that what we need to do is to refuse this application, and in the strongest possible terms go back to the applicants and say, this just isn't the way forward. You've got seriously to rethink that. And I haven't even touched on the landscape impact and the way that plethora of gardens around extends a kind of urbanisation out into the rural landscape. I think if one was marking it, one wouldn't give it much more than 1 out of 10, I think, frankly. And it needs a complete rethink, in my opinion. And if Mike is moving the recommendation, I'll be more than happy to second it.
The chances are, of course, that we probably granted planning permission for that barn. Right. You're seconding what Mike has said, yes.
If I can just come back on Ken, on the 1950s barn. I mean, there is a 20th century society that is involved in heritage. It would be very interesting to get their take on whether there is any validity in keeping that building there.
I think that is not
like Ken says, it's pretty much an abomination.
I think that is a reasonable suggestion, actually.
But that is what the heritage statement should be about. That its importance should have been identified and taken into account.
Right. I've got Dermot, Jean, and who's the third? Oh, and Bill. Right, okay. Dermot.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with a lot of what Ken and Mike have said. obviously the applicant has asked about deferring this application, but is there too much that needs to be assessed and considered for a deferment? Are we really, you know, Ken's given it 1 out of 10. Probably answers my question really, but Adam, what's your thought?
My view is yes, there are very substantial changes needed. We'd need a new heritage statement, and then once that heritage statement is done, there would have to be effectively a redesign, in my view, and that would need to happen outside of the application process. And I'd welcome the applicant to come in for pre-application advice once that initial step has been done and a heritage statement's been done, and then we can work through a design. But yeah, my view is we have a scheme in front of us which has been in for a while. Officers have spoken to the agent and tried to work through these issues, and we are where we are. So my view is I would prefer that members determine the application as submitted today.
Right. I've got Jean next, and then Phil.
Thank you, Chairman. I think also I would support refusal on this reason. One of the reasons why is highway authorities. They've actually wrote here and said that they would ask us to hold this in abeyance, so that they could revise the plans that the information they've put in there that they would like them to do. And so that is one of the reasons, I think, also, apart from all the other things that people have commented on. But I do take into consideration that the Town Council has no objections. And I can understand their reasoning, but I think if this moves forward, then that can always be looked at in a different light. So I'm supporting refusal.
Okay, Bill?
Thank you. Yeah, I just agree with the comments on the heritage and conservation aspects. It's a poor scheme. I would go further, and I'd support refusal, because the development itself is an overdevelopment of the site. It goes well beyond the historic buildings. We on the site visit yesterday, we actually paced out the area at that bottom corner, the bottom you can see on the map on the screen, and it's a considerable extension of residential usage into the countryside, which has little if nothing to do with the historic development. The site itself is separated from the existing built-up area by several fields, so it can actually be seen, regardless of the demerits of the poorness of the scheme in terms of historical and conservation things. It's all can be seen as a development outside, overdevelopment outside the Bakewell, the urban area, the built-up area of Bakewell, and that needs some thought on any future scheme. Not to say there can't be a scheme, but it's far too big and far too extends and has, as I think Ken said, impacts upon the wider landscape.
Thank you very much. I think there seemed to be a consensus developing, so I'm going to suggest we put the matter to the vote unless anybody else wants to speak. Right, all those in favour of refusing... Sorry, who else is...
Just for a point of clarity, I don't think Mike said whether he wanted the additional reason about lack of information adding.
He did say that, yes.
He did.
Yes, he did. So with the additional point about lack of information, the recommendation as set down is what is up for a vote. All those in favour of refusing on the grounds set out. Those against? That's unanimous. Thank you. I'm having problems. That's better. Right, agenda item 8, a house at Pound Street, Sheen. Who's dealing with this? Are you dealing with it, Adam?
Thank you, Chair. This application is for one affordable dwelling in Sheen. Members visited the site yesterday. The site is on Pound Street, which is the main street which runs through Sheen, opposite Staffordshire Notting, which you can see there. and then neighbouring properties, some of which are listed buildings as set out in the report. So if we zoom in a bit, you can see that the application proposes a single dwelling. The dwelling would be sited gable onto the road with a new access to a parking area and garden around. There are some trees on the site on the southern boundary there, which would be retained in the scheme. You can see there a bit more closely what the layout would look like. So that's the dwelling in the middle. And this is the site, which was a former car park for the pub, which was in sort of 2 parcels. So the car park was to the left there, and then it also included this site. And you can see it there in the background behind where that sign is. And again there in the distance. So that's where the dwelling would be sited. So we're looking north there. So you would be looking at the rear elevation of the dwelling from that direction. And then from this direction, you'd be looking at the principal or front elevation. So this is the floor plan. So there's living accommodation at the ground floor, and then 3 bedrooms at first floor. Proposal, it's for the 97 square metre dwelling, which is the maximum size allowed under policy. And then here are the elevations. You can see a traditional dwelling built of stone and tile, so gritstone and tile, with a porch on the front, timber windows. There's an air source heat pump proposed on the gable furthest from the road. And so that's the elevation that you'd see from the road. With the gable on, and there are solar panels as well, as you can see on the rear roof slopes. And that's the rear elevation, which you'd see looking north from, as we saw before. So there are 2 key issues in this case, as set out in the report. Firstly, the applicant was born and raised in Sheen, and that's acknowledged. However, the applicant doesn't have a local qualification as defined in our policies. So while it is accepted that the applicant is in need of affordable housing, there isn't a justification in terms of our policy for why that need should be met in the national park, where our policies are generally restrictive. Secondly, there are concerns about the siting and orientation of the proposed dwelling, which would be set fairly back into the site, and as you can see would be gable onto the road. As we saw on site, in Sheen, there are properties which are gable onto the road and which are also set back, but in this locality, in this part of Sheen, the buildings generally have a closer relationship and front onto the street. So in this prominent position, officers are concerned that the dwelling would appear incongruous with the neighbouring buildings. So officers have requested that the design be amended, and there have been some minor amendments to the porch and fenestration, but the orientation and location of the property hasn't been amended. So the application is recommended for refusal for the reasons set out in the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. We have one speaker, Mr. Matt Goodwin, the applicant. Mr. Goodwin, you've got 3 minutes to address us in. There's a little button on your thing in the front. The red light here should come on, and then you know we can hear you.
Yep.
Okay?
Okay. Hello, I am Matthew Goodwin, and this is my wife, Katie. These are our 2 children, Lewis 9 and Georgia 4. We are the applicants for the new build home. Katie and I have been together 22 years, and we've been married for 14 of those. I was born and raised in the parish of Sheen, christened in St Luke's Church. Attended Sunday school in Sheen and first school in Worslow. I've played in Worslow Silver Band for 35 years, was a fireman at Longner. I ran and played in Longner football team along with my childhood friends until we decided we were too old, and I'm still on the Longner Sports Committee. Katie, who is a staff nurse, has been at my side from 19 years old, and most of our friends live in the parishes locally. If successful in moving back, Katie would love to look for work nursing in the community or at a local surgery, of which we know there is a need. I have followed my father's footsteps and am a self-employed electrician serving the local residents, farmers, publicans, caravan sites, etc. A business my dad started 45 years ago and I continue today. This policy says I'm not local. If what I've not just mentioned says I am, then surely the supporting letters and parish council response proves otherwise. My mum and dad have lived in the parish for 45 years and have always been active members of the community. Now in their mid-70s, they're in need of our help, more so as each year passes. Mum's ill health last year has meant now, more than ever, we need to be close to them in old age. At 23 years old, Katie and I decided it was the right time for us to live together. Even though we tried to buy locally, we were outpriced by the need of city folk and such to buy holiday homes and second homes. We moved slightly further afield to Leek with the hope that we could return the 8 miles as soon as possible. When this land came onto the market and with previous planning approved, we saw the opportunity to get back to the community, for our children to enjoy it like I did, and for us to be close to our parents for their care. We didn't hesitate or think that an inflexible policy would prevent that from happening. Today we are looking for your approval on this, which would also be consistent with another house built recently in the village, whose applicant was in exact same position as me, and you saw fit to relax the policy. With regard to the orientation of the house on the plot, the Conservation Officer seems to have looked in the wrong village, in my opinion. Members have seen on site yesterday that multiple properties, including the most recently built, are in the same orientation to the road as our plans. These plans previously passed on the same site are in the same orientation. Members also saw how close the house would be to the closest property, Shepherd's Holt, if we were to turn it on the plot and bring it forward as suggested. The residents of Shepherd's Holt have commented to say that the orientation should stay as planned. As planned, no effect to the sunlight or privacy will be seen from any resident in the village. If there are some parts of the plans that the members would like to see removed or altered, then we can do this by agreement. We don't want to jeopardise the whole development on that point. We are in housing need and want to proceed with the development quickly and cannot afford to fight an appeal. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Goodwin. Right, there are really 3 issues here. The first one, of course, is the location of this particular property within what the local plan describes as an important open space. And I think, if I read the report correctly, you're happy that this is a suitable place for a house, and we don't have to worry about the relationship to the open space.
Yeah, as the applicant mentioned, there has been a development approved on this site, and it's mentioned in the history section of the report. Officers are happy in principle with the development of this part of the open space. The important open space in Sheen is quite expansive, and I think we have to consider the impact of this, which again was part of the former car park.
I raised that actually because I've just realised I made a note when I was reading it earlier on. The second reason of refusal complains about the siting, of which I think I would interpret as meaning whether it should go here or not.
That is meant in the siting sense as if you were dealing with like a reserved matters application, which is basically where the building is sited.
Within the site?
Within the site. It's not the actual...
Not about it being there.
Not the principle of this site, yeah.
So the other 2 issues are the design issue and the way it's orientated, and the fundamental question as to whether this should be regarded as a local affordable house within the terms of our existing policies. That's the issue. Any thoughts from members on this? Bill?
Yeah, so 2 points. I think I was on the site visit yesterday, and it's clearly a linear village with buildings along the road at various points. So a dwelling at this point would be, as I think the report says, would be acceptable. I think I do agree that in this location, that something closer to the road and the main frontage facing the road would be in keeping with the adjoining buildings, because it's still quite an area of urban value, village values that would fit in with the character of the village and the main street. So, as I say, there shouldn't be any problem with developing that site, but in an appropriate way. And secondly, on the local connections, I don't think the word affordable it means all sorts of things, doesn't it? But in terms of someone having local connections, I think that should be taken into account, despite the fact that it doesn't meet, what is strictly in the policies, because they do clearly have a local connection and have connections to the village and still keep those connections. So I would be tempted to that's my view, that not to accept this application, but to accept some amendment of it that meets the planning requirements.
I think your second point actually is a valid one, in the sense that our new management plan specifically aims to help families get back together and people to be living near where they're working and so on and so forth. So that is an issue that we need to think about. Any other members? Ken?
Chair, a question to start with of our officers. The application is badged as a proposed local needs dwelling, and that we're hitting the quite understandable, we're between a rock and a hard place, between a lot of local engagement, a lot of local background, thanks Mike, yet are not conforming with our policies. If this had come forward as an open market dwelling, what would have been the recommendation?
It would have been to refuse it.
Would it?
Yeah, and a market dwelling here, I don't think there's any argument that that would be required to achieve conservation enhancement.
Okay.
The only way I think you could have permitted that is to argue that this site is such an eyesore that the dwelling is necessary to get rid of it. And although it is a bit of an eyesore, I don't think it's that much.
No, okay. No, yes. Okay. A relative eyesore.
Ryan would like to say a word. Half a second.
Yeah, I mean, there's long-standing policy to allow for people that have an original connection to return to the national park. In some ways, I was brought up in Cumbria, for 18 years, left, should I qualify for a home back in Dacre in Cumbria? But, so there are rules about, the fact that people make choices to move away, how much reasonable is it to return? So you have to stack up the kind of policy areas around this. This is someone that's in housing need, they've stated that point. I've got, we have acknowledged some connection. Live on the edge of the national park. There's still some kind of locational connection there, but it's clearly stretching this point about, people making a choice to leave and how long can you come back. So policy sets a rule about that, and it says we can allow people to retain that connection of 10 years within a 20-year period. And that's just the starting point. So I think you're looking at putting weight on these different elements alongside obviously the siting issues. But we have tried to be positive about that point. It was raised, when I first came here 20 plus years ago, that point about people leaving shouldn't dismiss the fact that there is still a connection there in the locality. And people still can contribute to the area. So I don't want to lose that point, but policy has to sort of set some rules about that for us to consider where those relationships are.
I recognise that, but it's the choice issue as well, isn't it? It's when the choice is forced upon one, as we've heard, from affordability, rather than a conscious decision, I prefer to go and live in Leek. But I suppose, thank you for those explanations, but I have a lot of sympathy with the points that Bill was making. I think given that this is... Sheen is a kind of open linear village. There's a lot of space between properties. This side of the road, this would be the first property for quite a long way, both to the south and to the north. And I think we need to, if we were minded to approve, I think we need, as Bill has suggested, to reflect the linearity of the properties on the other side of the road and those to the south, as you can see on this, which would be why I would prefer to see a renegotiated orientation of the property. My problem is, as I think it is for everyone, that the applicant doesn't qualify in residential grounds.
Yeah, and the officers are right to bring that up in the report, absolutely. But it's interesting, this thing about, they've chosen to leave the national park. Actually, often don't choose. There's no option. There's no option to choose, and I think we are occasionally entitled to look at the whole picture and not just at the detailed letters of the policy. And I think Bill's approach is a common sense one in the circumstances we hear today. Other members, Mike?
Yeah, fully supportive of what was said, particularly Bill's comments being favourable to the applicant moving back to the village. I know the issue around the orientation of this property, and if you were to bring it into line with other properties on the opposite side of the road, so that they're facing each other, as houses so often do on a street. The porch, does that then become an issue? Would that be acceptable if it was rotated 90 degrees, so it's facing
Yeah,
towards the
I
street?
wouldn't imagine it would need to be, you know, hard up to the road. I think that it is okay to have some setback, and with that setback, I think a porch would still work. And as you can see there, the dwelling wouldn't necessarily face directly towards a dwelling. There's a gap between those dwellings, so it could face towards that gap. So I think it works from an amenity point of view. Yeah.
Other members? Jean?
I'm finding this really difficult because it's ticking a lot of boxes of the reasons why they're moving back to the village, and I can understand what officers have said about moving away and where the conditions come through. There was a house there originally, I was planning permission for a house there. The local connections is ticking boxes. I'm just hoping we can come to some agreement where a discussion can be had that this can go ahead. But Bill, what are you actually suggesting? Are you saying change the plan of the house?
Yeah, just to, I think the planning officer has said, you know, if we move the house towards the road and round a little bit, within that site, that would fit in better on the site visit. I think we sort of appreciate on the site visit that would be a better fix for that site. Bearing in mind, I suspect, this is not prejudicing anything, but adjacent sites opposite the pub might be subject to future applications. You know, it's an obvious thing. They're sort of derelict sites at the moment. So we need to be mindful of that. We're creating the start of possibly additional development. Now that's outside this application completely. So we need to be minded of the future as well as what's happening now. But I think, yeah, that would be my suggestion, and that I hope that, well, I mean, the applicant's here, so we could ask him or leave it to further negotiations. Yes. Yeah.
Well, can I suggest well, Dermot, I'm going to suggest an approach.
Yes, I'm minded for us to defer this application and for further conversations between the applicant and our officers to take place. The sticking point seems to be the orientation of the building. I don't personally have a problem with the application as it is, but I'm mindful of what other people have said. There seems to be quite a lot of support in the village. I'm mindful it's a positive to have young people coming back into the Peak Park, because they all seem to be going the other direction, really, because they can't afford. I mean, these people are obviously in a better situation, that they could afford to buy the land and develop the site. Happy to listen to what other people say, but could we defer this? That would be my proposal.
Well, may I suggest a form of words, which is that we accept that a sufficient case of local connection has been made here to justify the house, and that we defer the application to enable all of those discussions to take place about the best design and orientation on the site. That would be my suggestion of words.
As an exception.
As an exception, indeed.
If officers were to reach agreement with the applicant and get an amended scheme, would members want to see that come back, or would members be happy for officers to deal with that?
I think I'm more than happy for officers to deal with it, not least because the applicant wants to get on with it. So that's my form of wording. Would somebody like to move that? Mike, you've moved it, seconded by Dermot. All those in favour? Anyone against? No, that's carried. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Goodwin. Yes, I suppose so. Should we reconvene? I was just starting to enjoy myself. Shall we say 11:30? we will reconvene, and we are dealing now with the repair and conversion of barns at Green Farm Church Barns, Middleton by Ulgrave, and it's a planning application and a listed building application which will be dealt with together, but the vote will obviously be taken separately on each application. Who's dealing with this? You are. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, this is an application and planning permission and listed building consent for conversion of 2 barns, which you'll see in a minute, to dwellings, along with outbuildings to ancillary uses. The site is in Middleton by Ulgrave within the conservation area, and the barns are curtilage listed in relation to Green Farmhouse, which is up here. So you see there was a historic range of buildings, and now this site is in separate ownership. The application site, well, these barns have had planning permission in the past for conversion, and that's lapsed. So that's the existing layout. So barns described in the report, North Barn is this barn here, which is south facing on the boundary, and then you've got South Barn, and then these are the 2 outbuildings that are mentioned in the report. So the proposed site plan, as you can see, the buildings are retained and converted. North Barn here would be provided with a small curtilage here, and South Barn would be provided with this curtilage, a larger garden here, and would also retain these 2 outbuildings for ancillary uses, ancillary accommodation, residential accommodation and home office. Obviously they'd be able to put to various ancillary purposes. And then there's proposed sort of shared parking area using the existing access at the front of the site. So this is obviously here we are in Middleton by Ulgrave, and this is, you can see the access to the site next to the site notice there, and that's looking down into the site. And then, so as you can see, we've stood here at the access, effectively looking at the gable end of the North Barn. And then that's North Barn, as you can see, a very attractive vernacular limestone barn, which is in a fairly poor state of repair. And again, further back, and you can just see on the right there, the South Barn, which is that. It's a more substantial building, but again, in a fairly poor state of repair. And as you can see, the 2 barns together there. And that's the rear of South Barn. So you can see North Barn in the background. So this area in front of us would be where the garden of North Barn would be. And the rear elevation of South Barn here is relatively blank, which allows a curtilage to go in there for North Barn without harming amenity of either future occupants. That's just looking at the gap from the other way. So you've got North Barn on the left there. And that's outbuilding A, as you can see, again, a nice, attractive, vernacular, smaller barn in poor state of repair. And outbuilding B, similarly. And then the 2 outbuildings together. So this is looking back. This is where the proposed garden, so that's South Barn on the right, and the outbuildings on the left. And that's the relationship from the north of the site to the listed farmhouse. That's Green Farmhouse there. And you can see North Barn on the right. This is looking towards Tor Farm from the application site. And then this is looking towards Dale Cottage. So here we're in the sort of extended area of garden for the South Barn. And you can see that that's the relationship. So you've got Dale Cottage in the background. Concerns have been raised by them in terms of impact on their amenity, which is dealt with in the report. So the buildings are listed in a poor state of repair. And it's clear that they make a positive contribution to the conservation area, and planning permission has been approved in the past for their conversion. So in principle, the conversion of the buildings to market dwellings as proposed is acceptable. A viability statement's been submitted, and officers are satisfied that it's not viable to deliver affordable housing as part of this scheme, which is understandable given the condition of the buildings and the likely costs involved to convert them. And overall, the proposed conversion is a high quality design, so we get to the plans. So that's existing North Barn, and then proposed. Existing North Barn would be, in the roof would be subdivided to the bedrooms. So existing north elevation of North Barn, so this is facing the neighbours. There'd be shutters put in to deal with overlooking and a flue. And then the south elevation, which faces into the application site, Actually, a lot of repair works there, but as you can see, the conversions within the shell of the building and the new roof lights proposed. And the elevation, gable elevation again, using the existing openings with an air source heat pump tucked away. And then the blank existing elevation will remain blank. You can just see the flue there. South barn would be a smaller dwelling, and the roof space would be left for a bat roost, left unconverted. So at ground floor there, you can see 2-bedroom dwelling, the existing up floor, and then you see the bat loft there, and the flue and insulated box going up. So that's the existing north elevation of the barn. You see again, retained essentially as it is, with new opening, well, not a new opening, a new window in the existing opening. And then that's the existing south elevation with the steps up to the door, which again will be retained. You can just see the flue. And that's the main elevation of South Barn, which should be provided with new openings. And the rear, as you can see, is fairly blank. So this is the elevation that would face the garden of the other barn, North Barn, and there's a proposal to retain shutters in that opening, so there'd be no overlooking windows there. So there's some details about the doors, which are generally happy with high quality designs that are traditional and appropriate for the buildings. This is outbuilding A, and that's to be ancillary accommodation. As you can see there, small living space, bedroom, bathroom, an air source heat pump using the existing openings with a flue, and again using the existing openings. You can see with a new roof light. And then this is outbuilding B, which is, I say, store, home office. Again, get through these using the existing openings, and there's proposed solar panels on that building on the rear, and opening out that existing opening, just put some doors in. So the application is recommended for approval subject to a number of conditions. There are some additional conditions which officers would like to raise at this point. Firstly, just a condition to ensure that the shutter to the rear of South Barn, which we just looked at, is retained throughout the lifetime of development. To agree the precise spec of the solar panels to make sure they're appropriate finish and type. And a final condition to agree and control lighting, both in terms of the interest of the character and appearance of the buildings, but also for ecological reasons. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. We have one speaker. Welcome back, Jane. And you know the rules.
I'm here to speak in support of the recommendation in relation to approval for the planning and listed building applications at Green Farm Church Barns, Middleton by Yulgrave. I want to start by thanking the planning officer, Peter Mansbridge, who's been clear and constructive throughout the process. The scheme has been designed to take into account the qualities of the buildings and the ecological interests that exist on the site. My clients have a genuine enthusiasm for the buildings and see things that others might consider limitations as part of the character of the building and have worked with them. The south barn was found to have a significant bat roost in the upstairs, and this has been given over entirely to function as a bat roost in the long term, despite the fact that it significantly reduces the number of bedrooms that could be delivered. Rare stone flag floors will be lifted, recorded and replaced after insulation has been inserted. Stone boskins, which previously created stalls for cattle, will be retained as a feature in the bedroom. Shutters will be added to openings reflecting the previous appearance of the building. While the Conservation Officer has concerns about the domesticating effect of the air source heat pumps, the alternative would be tanks for oil-powered heating, which would have an equally domesticating impact and none of the sustainability benefits. The flues for the log burners are sensitively located on less prominent elevations. The authority's own SPD on conversions includes a photograph of a converted barn as an example of subtle and low intervention conversion, and I note that this is a similarly located flue. I'm sympathetic to the neighbours' concerns as they currently have an unusually private garden for a village location. However, as the report sets out, planting is proposed which will provide some additional screening, and the distance of separation between the site and the house is considerable. The residential amenity of the neighbour will be maintained at an acceptable level within policy requirements. The barns are in a poor state of repair and are now extensively propped to reduce further harm to the structure. The barns are not suitable for agricultural use. Their loss would be harmful to the listed building and the conservation area. Planning permission was granted in the past to convert the barns, but the previous owner did not carry out this conversion and the permission expired. The structural report shows that they are currently robust enough to be capable of conversion without significant rebuilding. However, if these applications are not permitted, then there is a good chance that the buildings will fall into further disrepair, endangering their historic features and the bat roost. The public benefit of the conservation that the proposal delivers is considerable and carries considerable weight in the planning balance, and on this basis I ask you to permit the development. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think this one is hopefully straightforward. Has any members got any comments to make on it? Ken?
Just a query. I was going to mention lighting, but Adam has done that. Does that include external lighting, Adam? Or is it specifically external lighting that you...
Specifically external lighting.
Thank you. The only other comment, and Jane has referred to it in a way, is the issue of the flue. The report says that there's an objection from the Conservation Office about the flues. But there didn't seem to be, I mean, on page 76 under climate change, it just refers to the air source heat pumps. Has that issue been resolved? Are we looking at something that is going to include the flues and the wood burners, or what?
Yes, the application does include the flues and wood burners. Officers' planners' view is that there would be elements of harm, but in the balance that the scheme would deliver public benefits, and that overall the scheme would conserve the building. So officers, after considering the Conservation Officer's view, are content with the scheme as you've seen just
Okay,
now.
thanks. It was just for clarification, Chair. I'm happy to move the recommendation.
Bill?
Yeah, just one point on the affordable homes against holiday rentals, and I appreciate that the evidence is, and I've got no way of disputing that these couldn't be made into residential units or affordable homes. It just occurs to me at some point that you know, if you had a settlement where the majority of buildings needed restoration, and you would end up with a situation where that settlement was entirely affordable homes or largely affordable homes. So I think that argument goes, the economic argument goes some way, but ultimately there must be a cut-off point, because I think communities in the Peak District are quite worried about being overwhelmed by holiday rentals, basically, and non-primary residential use. And it's something to bear in mind, not in this case, but I think, you know, that can't be the fact that it's, if you see what I mean, in fact, it's only economic to make an affordable home. You could end up with every new conversion in the Peak District being an affordable home, and that has implications for the communities that are in the Peak District. So just an observation more than anything. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to second Ken's motion, actually. Does anybody have any further comments? All those in favour of approving it? It's subject to those extra conditions, of course. Okay. Anyone against? And could the compliments from Jane to Peter Mansbridge be passed on, please? Thank you. What? Oh, and we have to go on to the listed building consent, I'm reminded. I move the listed building consent application. All those in favour? Anyone against? That's carried as well. Right. Church Farm Lane, Great Longston. Agenda item 11. And Mark, you're taking this for us.
That's right, thank you, Chair, and good morning, members. So the application here is for the change of use from agricultural field to a site for 5 touring caravans or motorhomes between March and October each year. The application site is, as you can see on the screen here, it's at the western end of a larger field parcel abutting the northern side of Beggarway in Great Longston. The land is currently used for grazing and storage of farm equipment. And you'll see on the next slide that the application site area here includes all of the field, but you'll see in the following slide that actually the parcel subject to development is smaller. The site is currently accessed by a gateway, which is down at this corner of the site here, which you'll see in the photographs. And Beggarway Highway runs along the southern edge here. and there is a public right-of-way which runs up the site here, another one which runs across the top of the field here, going out to the fields beyond, and the dotted line that you can see there is also a further public right-of-way which cuts through the corner of the field. The nearest neighbouring dwellings are Croft Lodge and Church Croft, which you can see to each side of the site here. Whilst we're on this slide, and so you can see the relationship, the application has been accompanied by a noise report which assesses the impact of noise on, from the development on these neighbouring properties, and that concludes that those impacts would be acceptable. That report has been reviewed by an environmental health officer as part of the application process, and they agree with that assessment. So there's no objections on those grounds. And this shows the site as proposed for development. So as I say, this part of the field is not subject to a change of use under the proposals, albeit there's actually no boundary demarcation on the ground proposed along that eastern boundary. A new access is proposed into the site off Beggarway, which is roughly 8 metres wide through the existing stone wall boundary of the site. And the 5 pitches for the caravans or camper vans are proposed along the northern edge here. A new access turning area and hard standing is proposed to come into the site and then turn west. And the green circles you can see here are proposed planting. And there's a close view which is showing you the same thing in effect. So moving on to the photographs, this is the site entrance at the southwestern corner, and the public right-of-way that I mentioned is this road here. Roughly where you can see the sign there is where it cuts through the field, and it also follows along the other side of the wall you can see there as well. And this is Beggarway, of course, at the front of the photograph. So this is a view taken slightly further east along Beggarway looking into the field. The units themselves would be positioned roughly along this back edge of the field here. And this view is taken slightly further east again and shows roughly the position of the new access into the site. So it'd break through the wall here at a width of roughly 8 metres, and that would allow access. The existing access is to be maintained as well. That isn't to be closed off, as we're advised it's required for agricultural access out of season. This is looking west, so we're now on the footpath. This is behind the site. So in this photograph, Beggarway is running to the other side of the wall and hedgerow that you can see there. And so in this photograph, the proposed units would be along here. The access would come into the site roughly along this line. Photo from the same angle but from further away. And then this is following the footpath out into the field. You can see roughly the line of the footpath here, which I stood upon taking these photographs. And so you can see the views into the site from that position. So again, the new access would come in roughly there. The hard standing and access trackway would turn across the site there, and the units themselves would be at this side of the field. And this is just showing the visibility from the existing access looking west, and then the same looking back east. So as you've seen in the report, the application is recommended for refusal on the grounds of landscape impacts, effectively. In principle, policy RT3 and development management policy DMR1 allow for the development of small-scale camping and caravan sites, provided they don't cause harm to the landscape character or neighbouring uses. In this case, the proposed pitches, when occupied by caravans or motorhomes, and the access traffic would be highly prominent when viewed in close proximity from the road and from the public rights of way that bound and cross the site. They'd also be prominent in more medium-range views from the public footpaths, as you saw in the photographs there. Some new planting is proposed, as you saw on the plans. I'll go back to. However, that would take a number of years to establish, and given the long season from March until October that's proposed for the operation of the site, even when fully established, it wouldn't be entirely effective throughout the year. And obviously, while the trees are coming into leaf and losing their leaves at the start and end of the seasons, they would remain. The site would remain open to view. In addition, the introduction of the access would itself harm and change the character of the highway, and would also afford views into the site through the screening once that had established. The applicant's agent has noted that they would intend to use the site under permitted development for up to 60 days a year, for camping if this application wasn't to be approved. That's noted. However, that wouldn't come with the infrastructure proposed here. The new access, for instance, wouldn't exist. And also that would be effectively 2 months a year, whereas, of course, the impacts here would be for up to 8 months a year. And so for these reasons, Chair, the application is recommended for refusal.
Yes, thank you. Could I just clarify a couple of points? You've mentioned this 60 days, is it, PD rights for
That's
caravans? Right. When the Highway Authority, I've only just thought about this as you've been talking, when the Highway Authority have made their comments, have they sort of recognised that the existing access could be used for 2 months a year anyway for this purpose? You know, if this was a sort of big permanent development that was there all the time, the access would become crucial and you'd do your very best to get the very best out of it. But this is the present access can be used whenever it wants to be. Probably can be used by the caravans, actually, even though the new one might be provided there. But at the moment, it can be used, and there's no evidence, is there, of any accidents or difficulties in using the present one.
If I go back to your first question in terms of whether the Highway Authority have commented in light of the permitted development position, they haven't, but they'd have had no reason to have. They've been asked to look at the proposal for the new access and the impacts of the development with that included. They objected to a previous application which was refused on both landscape and highway grounds for a development of this site for camping purposes. Without the access proposed, the Highway Authority objected. That's really as much as I can tell you in that regard.
So, I mean, normally the Highway Authority won't do anything about road safety unless the road's covered with bodies. And here we've got an access that can be used quite regularly. I'm a bit... Anyway.
I should be clear that the Highway Authority haven't raised no objection to the proposal as it stands.
Okay. Right. Yes, we've got 3 speakers. The first one is Mr. Alistair Sutton, who I think is going to be recorded for us. Oh, he's coming in person. Right, okay.
Thank you, Chair. My name's Alistair Sutton. I'm here today to support the planning application for Church Lane Farm, Great Longston. Church Lane Farm consists of 280 acres, a herd of approximately 220 beef cattle. It's an integral part of Great Longston Village and has been for many years. This is the 4th generation of the family farming here, and it is currently worked by brothers Dan and Tom Cox, along with their wives and 4 children. They are highly regarded within the village for all their hard work and efforts they put into helping the local community. As you will be aware, the farming industry is in somewhat of a crisis at the moment, with lack of support from government, high costs and challenging market conditions. This has led to Tom and Dan to have to seek out new ways to keep the farm going. At the moment, as well as being full-time farmers, one or both are having to work at a local quarry, doing 8-hour shifts, often 5 days a week. This at times works out of upwards of 90+ hours per week. As I mentioned before, they both have young children and trying to keep a balanced family and working life is nigh on impossible. By passing this application today not only helps Tom and Dan, but will bring much needed trade to the village, its shops and 2 village pubs, as well as surrounding areas. The application has been well thought out as in keeping with the surrounding areas. It's only 5 pitches, uses less than half a field. It will be landscaped in keeping with the village. This is about diversification and using the land to sustain the farm and its future. It's for Elsa, Isla, Eva and Asa, the 5th generation of Church Lane Farm. Many thanks for listening.
Thank you very much. Next we have Mr. Critchlow.
Morning. My name's Andrew Critchlow, NFU County Advisor for Derbyshire. With the loss of the main government support mechanism for farms, known as the Basic Payment Scheme, BPS, family farms such as Church Lane Farm are having to look towards diversification. The components of the new Environmental Land Management Scheme, ELM, will never fully make up for the shortfall left by the removal of BPS. In fact, farms such as this that are already delivering to the environment and are in agri-environment schemes such as Countryside Stewardship will find it harder to make up for the loss of BPS. They cannot be paid twice for delivering the same environmental benefits, and so will not be able to enter many of the ELM options. Without a range of incomes, Cox's will not be able to maintain the wider environment that they do so well at the moment. I sit on the FIPL panel, and I've seen several applications related to applications from Cox's. The reason the area looks so well in landscape is the care, pride and hard work the family put into maintaining the field walls, the hedges and features such as dew ponds. Indeed, the farm has been used to demonstrate how well FIPL delivers, and the FIPL lead advisor has made favourable comments about the application. Are we really expecting money earned from jobs off farm to subsidise the maintenance of farmland and its features? That should be from enterprises on the holding. It seems ironic we are quibbling over a 5-van site that we're well screened as this will be. From close views from the roads and surrounding houses, it is already fairly well screened, and we're very well screened with the proposed planting. Having looked online, I counted about 30 sites similar to this within the National Park, and few were screened better than this one. The real irony is from the field, there are often more than 5 motorhomes in prominent view parked on the road running up to Longston Edge. It must be remembered under current planning rules, the applicants are free to use the site and beyond for up to 50 tents or motorhomes, plus movable features such as toilets, for up to 60 days per year. That covers all your summer weekends. It isn't 60 altogether. It would be without the screening or restrictions or on the age of customers to limit the noise that is proposed now. It makes much more sense for everyone that a tightly controlled application is approved rather than allowing by default a campsite operating under much laxer planning rules. In conclusion, given the economic requirement for diversification, this high quality, low impact application is the obvious solution. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, the issues are clear, members. Bill. Oh, we've got an agent. I've got an agent question mark. Is that right? Okay.
So I didn't know who was going to manage to get here.
Sorry, I beg your pardon.
Thank you very much, Chair. Do I just press the button and it comes on, or it's on already?
It's already pressed.
Well, I'll start. I won't sing, sorry.
It's already pressed, so you don't need to.
Thank you. Chair and committee, thank you for letting me speak today on behalf of the clients. This is a policy compliant seasonal use that will cause no harm. It is related to the village and also tourism diversification with a controlled use. Policy has changed since the last application, as now, as previously said, under PD rights, 50 motorhomes at any one time, or a mixture of those and tents, can be done for 60 days a year without any control or constraints. The officer has not been available to discuss or offer conditions, and we waited patiently for their return. Hence, as our email, which is online, we accept the conditions, i.e. we offered semi-mature trees, reclaimed dry stone walling, which is similar to some of the wide accesses further down, waste management, and the field gate, if required, basically could be either shut off, but we were proposing to use it to just move cattle around behind the hedge and back up the lane, because it makes sense, to be fair, when you're moving cattle. No condition has asked been regarding demarcation, hence nothing's been put up. The officer's report fails to mention we did address the one complaint and also neighbours' concern letter online to do with screening and issues. Peak Park's landscape officer is supportive as it improves the landscape and the wildlife. Motorhomes and caravans are a seasonal part of Peak Park tourism now as part of the landscape and provides a sustainable income for farms. Planning is about local people. You've got 32 support letters, a petition of 67 people, local. Farm business, the NFU, local councillor, parish councillor. The local shop this morning said to me, basically, they're thinking about shutting down because they haven't got enough business. Planning should be positive and be for local people, for local needs. The permission is policy compliant, it's sustainable seasonal use that enhances wildlife and would help support a struggling family business and local businesses around. We hope you will recommend approval with conditions for waste management materials, semi-mature trees, which is what we've offered previously stated. Thank you for letting me speak today. I will stay around just in case you have some questions.
I'd be grateful if you would just stay where you are, because we may have some questions very quickly. Could you bring up the amended location plan, please? That's the one. If that, I'm just trying to reconcile the existing entrance exit, which may or may not be shut up, with the landscaping scheme. have you got the point I'm making?
I do take the point that you're making. Obviously, the scheme is indicative. There's no further details provided of species or anything. And as the agent has said, they'd be prepared to work with officers to agree an acceptable scheme. As laid out there, clearly those trees would prevent use of that access. So if that access is to be maintained, then that scheme would need to be altered.
Well, or the access has to be closed in order to enable that scheme to take place. And similarly, along the, I don't know, I haven't got the eastern boundary. There are no trees proposed there. There is an exposure to the countryside beyond. I'm just wondering how that would be dealt with in these arrangements.
Well, as proposed, it wouldn't be. Clearly, if members felt that the scheme was to be supported, then we could impose a condition to agree further landscaping and boundary to that eastern boundary.
Because you would have to keep the cattle off to enable the trees to grow, if you see what I mean. Okay? All right, okay. Members, Bill, I've got you down.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm very familiar with this site. I've used the public rights of way in the area and been in the village and driven along that road a lot, so I'm very familiar. So the comments are based on that, and also I was on the site visit yesterday. I think colleagues are very sympathetic to the needs of local families and businesses and agricultural enterprises, without doubt. Although I don't think we're a backstop to, I mean, it sounds like there are government failures to support farming, so I think we need to put that aside. To me, this is quite a significant introduction into the open landscape of the area, from the lane coming from Rowland to Great Longstone, and also as you use the public rights of way system onto Longstone Edge and from Longstone Edge, it would be very, very prominent, and I'm very familiar, and I can attest to that. The access, I think, additionally would break into the established boundary along that lane, and that would have a considerable impact on the visual aspects, but possibly also highway safety. I think the seasonality is somewhat irrelevant, because I don't think people in the Peak District go out now in the winter and the autumn. We don't dare to, it's so wet and cold. But seriously, I think that, you know, it would have an impact when the area is being used a lot. And the planning history of the site backs that up in terms of the refusals that have already taken up. So I would support the planner, the officer's recommendation for refusal on the grounds stated.
Right, any other members? I've got Dermot, and then Ken, and then Jean, and then Mike. Dermot?
Thanks, Chair. I hear what Bill says, but I am concerned about farming and the pressures they're under. I've got friends who farm and whatever, and I know the financial issues they're having, and they need to diversify. So I support us approving this application personally. I look at the letters, 32 letters in support of this application. As the agent said, the individual who objected, I think they've spoken to them and allayed their fears. I personally don't have too many issues with this. Looking here, let's have a look. The parish council have no objection. It's only for for part of the year. If we sort of allow this, we'll have more control surely over what happens on that site. Whereas at the moment, it sounds like they have rights to have events and have people stay on the site, which we probably wouldn't have any control over. Yes, I think there's some issues with the screening that needs to be addressed, but I'm sure that can be all conditioned. So I would recommend that we approve this application.
Is that a proposal or is it?
Yes.
Okay, just for the avoidance of doubt. Okay, I've got Ken next.
Thank you, Chair. A question before the comment. We've heard from, I think, several of the speakers a kind of threat in a way that if we don't approve it, then we'll have 60 days of free-for-all, up to 50 tents and mobile homes and things. Can I ask officers, if this was approved, does that permitted development right of enabling camping and the rest still obtain, or does it remove that right? So are we in a position where, if we approve this, we could still have up to 50 tents and mobile homes and things?
We could,
for 2 months of the year, or for 60 days of the year. Yeah.
And obviously the grant planning commission would enable members to remove certain development rights if they wish to. But bearing in mind that if the applicant has an extensive holding, he might be able to use those development rights elsewhere.
Yeah. So it's a kind of, it's a cloud that hangs hangs over all the time, in a sense. Okay. The comment, I suppose, Chair, is that we were here 2 years ago and we heard much the same then, and we took the decision to refuse this application, the application then. The application as presented now is slightly different. I think the orientation and location of the proposed orientation and location of the vehicles would be against the northern boundary, as opposed to being a line north-south on the eastern boundary. And I think there's more planting, more landscaping proposed than previously. But I think I lean towards Bill's comments that it's still an extension into the open landscape that isn't appropriate in this area, and isn't appropriate for all the reasons that we took on board last time when we refused the application. I think I understand where the speakers' comments are coming from, when they refer to the agricultural industry and the need for diversification. But as we heard from Andrew, the farm has been successful, I understand, in obtaining FIPL grant for various works. It's not as if it's entirely dependent on income that might come from a development like this. And at the same time, I'm sure that last year we learned that the applicants were both working in off-farm. It's a not unusual phenomenon in the Peak District, that it's a kind of dual economy of having to work both the land and in other areas, or work, if it's in quarrying, work the land in other ways. So I don't agree with Bill's point about seasonality and people not going out. I mean, all the evidence that I've seen and heard, and at the 70th anniversary of the Ranger Service last Tuesday, was the fact that we have the same level of people all year round now. So I think okay, it's not going to be occupied during the winter, but the infrastructure will be there, it will be visible, and the rest of it. And I think the creation of an 8-metre wide access through the road wall is a lot bigger than one would expect in this area in terms of landscape. So yeah, I would support the recommendation as developed, though I recognise that an alternative has already been given, Chair.
Thank you very much. I've next got Jean.
Thank you, Chairman. I think using this site for 60 days will have a lot bigger impact than having the 5 caravans or whatever motorhomes on there, or whatever use it is there. I've understood that the agent has worked with the landscaping, and I'm going to support Dermot on this because I'm going to second this approval to approve. I really feel that this site could be a lot better used. It'll have a lot better access. Highways have no objections as long as the conditions are there. So I'm going to second Dermot's approval.
Thank you. And Mike.
Thank you, Chair. Having listened to what people have said and the speakers, it is well known that farming has come under particular heavy pressure this last few years. I'm still mindful that we are a planning authority within the Peak District National Park, and we also have a duty to the landscape. And unfortunately, because the pictures were taken on quite a grey day, and the one we're looking at here is actually looking down on the farm. If you were to take a picture looking up, as those of us who were on the site visit yesterday, we were quite lucky and the weather was pretty good right up until lunchtime. And you could see the hills around where people like Bill take walks, go hiking, and it's quite evident that the caravan site would be prominent in the landscape. And I have real difficulty with that. I mean, farmers are diversifying in a variety of ways, and we recognise that on the planning committee, and we give permissions, particularly for sheds and barns and modern modern farm buildings that are needed in order to carry out farming. So that, I mean, that would be a legitimate call on us as people who sit on the planning committee, for want of a better way to put it. But I can't see how having a caravan site in such a beautiful location is doing anything to benefit the landscape here. So I would propose that we go with the officer recommendation, Chair.
Right. Well, that by all means.
Thank you. I also feel that it's promoting tourism, which that's what we're trying to do. As I say, I think it'll be more controlled, and it's supporting the local businesses as well. And I feel quite passionate the local businesses do need this support. I understand it can be used for 60 days, but this will be people that will return, and I just think the control of it will be a lot better.
Thank you. If this motion was to be approved, what sort of conditions would you be suggesting?
We would need the standard time limit for a 3-year commencement period, adopt the plans as proposed. There would need to be a holiday occupancy restriction to accord with our policies for holiday sites. There would need to be agreement and implementation of a scheme of landscaping. The recommendations of the noise report would need to be adhered to. We would need to control external lighting. There would need to be, the access works would need to be secured prior to commencement. We need to control the number of pitches to 5 as applied for, with no caravan remaining on the site for longer than 28 days a year. We'd need to control the season between March and October as applied for. And we would suggest that we remove permitted development rights associated with development required for a site licence, which would typically mean that ancillary buildings such as toilet blocks could be put up without planning permission if we weren't to otherwise control that. And that we also, based on, I don't know if members wanted to put this or not, but the point that Ken raised about whether they could continue to use the site outside of the permission for up to 60 days a year for larger groups, we could put a condition on removing permitted development rights for other camping provisions that are normally made under the GPDO, but that would apply only within the application site area.
Yeah. And the landscaping would include reinforcing that eastern boundary?
It could do.
Yeah, okay.
A condition on around waste disposal of various...
Yeah, that could be put on there as well, that'd be fine.
Okay. Dermot?
I hear what Mike says, but you know we use a condition of screening on many applications over the years. It's quite effective and whatever. I believe in time the screening would sort of diminish the effect on the open countryside. So I'm not too concerned about that. I think there's a mechanism with the officers to come up with a screening scheme that would effectively hide the caravans. Thank you.
I want to take the vote soon, so I'll have Bill and Jean, and I'm hoping we can then take a vote.
Yeah, just
Right.
sorry, just very briefly. I mean, Ken reminded us we are in the Peak District National Park, and that, you know, one of the prime purposes is to conserve the character and nature of the park, probably above and quite a few other things as well. So we must be very minded of that. And once something has changed, it's changed forever. You know, we can't go back on that. And I also appreciate there are permitted development rights, but the fact that that shouldn't influence our decision. We should look at this on its merits. And I think those rights are actually limited by what the access and nature of the site is at the moment. So you can't actually get 50 caravans on that site. They wouldn't actually survive on there. You know, you can't actually physically get them on. So I don't think that argument, I think, is somewhat irrelevant. Really, we need to look at the landscape quality and the purposes of the national park. Thank you.
Jean?
Hi, it's just for clarification. You said if it was approved, the suggestion for the 60-day conditions. Could you just explain that a little bit better? How it would change?
The permitted development right to allow up to 60 days of camping for any number of units, or up to 50 units, we could remove that provision so that the applicant couldn't take advantage of that provision. But that would only apply within the application site area, not to their wider holding, where they could still use those rights if they wanted to.
Can I just suggest that there would have to be another condition, which is to block the existing access? Because not least because of the impact on the landscaping.
We could impose that condition, and yeah, I don't know if that would be acceptable to the applicant in terms of the management of the farmland, but the condition would be there for them to contest and appeal if they felt the need to.
I have the agent has just said he wants to address this very quickly because I want to get on.
Thank you very much, Chair. It is very quickly. What I've noticed in our experiences with some caravan parks that most of them have a footpath adjacent, so the people, when they're going in a motorhome, basically, or caravan, come out of it, and rather than use the motorhome and drive in and out the access and around the village, they just walk out. So from this site has an excellent access to walk straight out into the village, into the pubs, into the shops, or even over the back, over the Longston Edge, where people park up with the caravans. So hopefully that's clarified. It's got a really nice direct public access. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right. Unless there's something really urgent that somebody wants to say. No, in that case, I think I will take the vote. The motion is to approve this application on the various conditions that Mark has outlined. All those in favour? Those against? 1, 2. So the motion is lost. So can I have an alternative motion, please?
Chair, I move the officer recommendation.
Seconded? Any? Right, okay. All those in favour? All those against? So that is passed.
Excuse me, Chair. Could I ask for a recount? I counted differently on the first vote for. I thought it was either equal or more. I counted the votes.
So let's start again. I was just beginning to register that because we'd ended up with the same vote twice and I didn't vote the second time round. So I'm going to take that vote again, if I may. So on the original motion to approve subject to those conditions, those in favour?
1, 2, 3, 4.
Right. Those against?
1, 2, 3, 4.
Right. Okay. That's what I actually vaguely thought might have happened. And I therefore must cast my casting vote, and I'm casting it in favour. Okay?
Chair, before I move on, can I be clear? Is the condition requiring the existing access to be closed part of that decision?
Well, can we deal with that as part of the landscaping scheme? That the existing access arrangements and the landscaping scheme be dealt with as part of the conditions. So that the two things are dealt with together.
that's fine, but I don't understand. You'd suggested that the condition was a requirement, so it was closed.
If you look at that, oh well, it's gone now. If you look, if you look at the plan, the trees are all over the existing access. So either you need a different landscaping scheme, or all the existing access has got to be closed, which seems to me to be the sensible thing to do. But you've got to, the two go together.
Yeah, I understand that. I just don't know if there's a requirement for officers to now ensure that access is closed.
I think we want a landscaping scheme that works, and if that necessitates the closure of that road, then that must be part of the arrangement.
Can I just clarify, did that approval include the removal of the other unpermitted development rights?
Yes,
yeah.
It did, yes. Right. We're now on to agenda item 12. And it's 20 past 12. I think we must deal with this one first. Right. Agenda item 12, Apart Hotel at Deepdale Business Park, Bakewell. You again, Mark?
Thank you, Chair. Before I start, there are some amendments to the officer report in this case. Amended plans have been received from the applicant's agent following the preparation of the report. These alter the internal layout, as you'll see on the slides, and it's our view that the proposals, as now put forward, do comprise a C1 hotel use. And so for that reason, reason 2 for refusal in the reports that you've got there is struck out. In terms of further representation, since the report was prepared, a further letter of support has been received, citing benefits for creating employment, boosting the local visitor economy, and reducing pressures for local housing to be taken into use for holiday accommodation in their support. So to move on to the proposals themselves, the application site, I expect most of you will be familiar with, is the Deepdale Business Park in Bakewell. So the A6 is running just at the top of the slide that you can see here. This is the access into the business park. The units that you can see here comprising Endcliffe Court at the front of the site are now residential accommodation, and all of the site behind remains in business use. The units that you can see along here are built and in those uses, as indeed are these, and you can see the ones you can see off the side of the slide here. And this is the application site area, which currently doesn't have a unit on it at all, as you'll see in the photographs I'm going to show you, but does have planning permission for a unit for business use, so for office, light industrial or storage and distribution use. The site as a whole is safeguarded in local policy for those business uses. This shows the site as it's proposed to be developed. So you can see the new building here would be proposed roughly in line with the existing buildings, with a large front-facing gable and parking set out to the front. There's an over-provision of parking as proposed there. That's a secondary matter. It is raised in the report, but that number would be, I think there's approximately 40 spaces there, which is an over-provision which we would have looked to reduce had the development been supportable in other regards. And that's it's just a slightly closer view showing you pretty much the same thing. And so some photographs. So this is looking into the site from the A6. The application site itself is at the back of the site behind the buildings that you can see the gable of here. This is Endcliffe Court that I mentioned at the front here. These are the units that are in residential use. And this is looking towards the plot. So the sort of behind where you can see the manicured trees here, there's open ground, and that's where the building would be positioned. And this is looking back at that same plot from the other direction, as it were. So it would align with this building here. You can see there would be some excavation work to do, and the building would be set at the same level as this building here. That's looking out of the site, looking south. You can see one of the other buildings on the site just here. And this is just examples of some other buildings within the site in terms of their massing and design, just to give you some context really. And so these are the units actually facing the application site, which is just off to the side here. So as I've said, the site itself is safeguarded for employment uses B1, B2 and B8 by a planning policy DME3 of the local plan. It's one of only 14 sites in the national parks which is safeguarded in this way to provide employment uses. The application, I'll go back to the onto the floor plans rather before I go through any more details. So the ground floor plans, here we go, as amended. This is the proposal out. There's going to be 13 units of accommodation within the building. Each one is a self-contained unit. If I can get my pointer to work. I can't. There we go. So you've got the main entrance here with a foyer, and then each of the individual units of accommodation is accessed off that foyer, and there's a stair that goes up, and you'll see the first floor in a moment as well. Each unit contains all the facilities of a dwelling, so you've got cooking, living, sleeping facilities within each unit. So that's the descriptions of an apart hotel as opposed to a hotel. It falls within the same use class. A reception desk and room has been added as part of the amended plans, and it's on that basis that we're satisfied it now comprises a hotel use rather than individual units of accommodation. Incidentally, where you're seeing these described as existing first floor plans, that's really it's a little misleading in so much as those are the approved plans for the site, but of course, as you saw in the photo, they don't exist on the site itself. And this is showing the other units that spread out at first floor level. And the last ones, which are partly up in the eaves of the building at second floor. And this shows the elevations of the building. These match the appearance of the building as it was approved for office or industrial use previously. As you'll see in the report, however, we have concerns about just adopting exactly the same design for what's now proposed as a hotel use. Partly the passage of time means that sort of design standards and design guidance has been updated, and as indeed as the MPPF, so there's scope for a more innovative and a design that better enhances the site, but also one that better reflects the use. So that is down as one of the reasons for refusal. However, to go back to those, the principal reason is that they would result in the loss of the employment use from the safeguarded site. And as I say, it's one of only 14 sites within the national park that's protected for that reason. The applicant in their application has made the case that there isn't sufficient demand for this unit to be built out and occupied in that way. However, as you'll have also seen in the report, regional and strategic evidence suggests that there is still demand for units of this type, and that this site remains of a good standard, well connected, offering good accommodation, and so it would continue to be available to meet that need. That position is supported by the District Council's economic development team, who object to these proposals as well. The final reason for refusal on the application is the lack of a sustainable drainage scheme that's been put forward, which is required for development of this scale by national policy as well as local policy. And that's the reasons for the refusal, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have a number of speakers on this, and the first speaker I have is Mr. Robert Hattersley. Do you want to take it in a different order? Yes. Okay. Well, the speakers I've got are Mr. Hattersley, Mr. Stubbins, Mr. Cotton, and Sir Richard Fitzherbert. So who's going first? Oh, right. Okay. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Alex Cotton from Mitchell Proctor Architects, and we are agents working for the applicant. Firstly, I would like to thank the Principal Planner, Mark Nuttall, for his assistance and proactive approach throughout this application. Block 6 Deepdale Business Park was granted planning approval in 2006, Since 2006, the property has been marketed by Mark Jenkinson and Co. However, for the past 18 years, the site hasn't been developed due to lack of interest from B1 use class businesses. Today, our application for change of use has been recommended for refusal due to the loss of employment land. This is the same argument that was put forward in the inspector's report from a previous application dating back to 2016, 7 years ago. Importantly, in that same report, the inspector recognised that planning policies should avoid the long-term protection of sites allocated for employment land where there is no reasonable prospect of the site being used for that purpose, and that applications for alternative use should be treated on their merits. Construction of Plot 6 was commenced in 2008, but work was suspended when several of the offices in Warren and Arden House became vacant. In this instance, given this plot has remained undeveloped, then surely sufficient time has now lapsed to justify its development for an alternative viable use. Our application proposes to change the use of Plot 6 from B1 to C1, a part hotel. In the Peak District Local Plan under section RT2, hotels, Part C says new build holiday accommodation will not be permitted except for a new hotel in Bakewell. Therefore, our proposal for an apart hotel is in line with planning policy. The Bakewell Employment Land Detail Review identified for the period up to 2034 a need for 1.3 hectares of employment land. However, the report also recognised that there is limited demand for office accommodation. Presently, there is about 2.3 hectares of employment land available. With only 1.3 hectares needed, there is therefore a surplus of 1 hectare of employment land in the area. The nearby Riverside development also clearly benefits from both its location and infrastructure to meet the employment land requirements within Bakewell. Our proposal for a part hotel supports local businesses. In terms of employment, the management group have already expressed ideas to include a coffee shop, which will create not only new job opportunities, but the facilities will also allow more people to stay in Bakewell, spending their money, helping the town to thrive. Rob Hattersley will expand on this shortly. In conclusion, we believe these proposals bring forward benefits to the district, which far outweigh the reasons for protecting employment land with no long-term prospect of the site being developed for such purposes. The matters relating to climate change and sustainable drainage can both be dealt with via suitably worded planning conditions. We trust you see the benefits of these proposals and grant planning consent here today.
Thank you very much. Who's coming next? I've got...
My name's Tim Stubbins, sir.
Okay, thank you. Right, thank you.
Chair, members of the committee, good morning. My name is Tim Stubbins. I'm a partner at Mitchell Proctor Architects and we are agents working for the applicant. Presently, extant planning consent exists for the building with Class E office use. Therefore, its size, scale and massing and appearance have already been approved and the building could be built, but with office use, as we have previously heard, is unviable. Our proposals are to utilise the building for an alternative, more viable use as an apart hotel under use Class C1. The internal arrangements can provide up to 13 self-contained short stay apartments for visitors to the Peak District, with a potential mix of studios, 1 and 2 bedroom accommodations with lounges and kitchen facilities. The apart hotel concept has become an important alternative for those requiring accommodation for business and holidaying, having greater facilities than can be found in traditional hotels. Having established positive links with a local operator, who will speak later, we have discussed further opportunities to include for a coffee shop and a ground floor unit designed to be accessible with standards for disabled visitors. Furthermore to this, we believe the proposal will attract more visitors to the Peak District, encouraging them to stay for longer periods than the day trippers, obviously boosting the local economy and all helping to sustain existing businesses and hopefully and to entice new opportunities for other start-up businesses. Through the planning process, we have established that these proposals conform to use Class C1, i.e. hotels including apartments,
bed and breakfast, boarding houses, etc. The application confirms in planning terms with the local Peak District's local plan in respect of recreation and tourism as confirmed by your principal planning officer. Our clients have indicated that these facilities could be built and up and running within 18 months, which will relieve the current lack of hotel accommodation in the district. It goes to say the beneficial effects of more tourist accommodation will be beneficial. And to this end, we sincerely look forward to your full support and ask you to approve the application against the officer's recommendation. I thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you, Mr Stubbins. Who is next? Sir Richard?
Good afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Richard Fitzherbert. I'm fortunate enough to chair Visit Peak District in Derbyshire, which is what most people would understand as the tourist board locally. Our organisation supports over 400 small and medium-sized businesses in Derbyshire and, of course, the National Park. We aid and assist our members in all aspects of their business, notably marketing, promotion, business support, training in all sectors such as welcome host and accessibility, but above all our aim is to support and enhance our industry in our wonderful area. We have a wonderful product. For our local indigenous businesses to properly function, yourselves as local authorities need to support local business. We need to be seen to support local business, and as inhabitants of the National Park, we need to increase the spend, as has been outlined by previous speakers. We need to encourage them. You all know that there's a shortage of larger hotel accommodation in our area. You also know that there's plenty of small-scale holiday lets and accommodation in the National Park. This application, in my opinion, comes somewhere in the middle, and it's a welcome and necessary addition at an accessible price point. I visited the site last week, and as those of you who visited will know, it looks a bit of a mess at the moment, with building work not having taken place and other stuff and materials dumped on site. If this is passed, not only will that area be transformed, so it will not be the eyesore that it is at the moment, it will also be a development and a welcome addition to the visitor accommodation locally. Until a few days ago, I did not know the name of the local operator that was potentially involved in the site. And so I'm thrilled that Rob Hattersley and his organisation Longbow Bars are keen to take on the running of it. Many of you, I hope, will have visited the Ashford Arms in Ashford in the Water nearby, which opened a couple of months ago. It is a triumph to everybody involved, and everybody in the National Park should be proud of that. And it's already had a stunning write-up in the Times last weekend. His other operations, both in the National Park, at Grindleford with the Maynard and Hathersage with the George, when it reopens shortly, are award-winning and, of course, employ a great number of people. Rob will tell you how many in the hospitality industry locally. And as well as employing those people, Longbow are training them. So we have really good staff now coming out of Longbow's operations. Longbow Bars are a success story for our industry in our area, and we desperately need to support them. Members, I leave the arguments, as been previously said, to the planning specifics to previous colleagues. I would urge you to go against Officer recommendation and approve this application using the valid planning reasons put forward. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. And so it must be Mr Hattersley next. Right.
My name is Rob Hattersley. I'm the owner and managing director of Longbow Bars and Restaurants Limited. I operate the Maynard in Grindleford, the George in Hathersage, and most recently the Ashford Arms, Ashford in the Water. As part of our ethos, we only deal with local suppliers wherever possible, therefore contributing back into the local economy. Only 3 hospitality businesses all within the Peak District National Park. I can only see this as a benefit to the area. The Peak District is inundated with visitors. My own businesses comprising 52 letting bedrooms run at an annual occupancy of 86%, which peaks at 97% during the summer months. Weekends are always full. It's not only great for my business, but I also support the livelihood of 180 employees and their families. With myself and every other Peak District business that operates letting rooms, we're oversubscribed, especially in summer months. Many holiday lets and hotels lack parking, so this application should include more than sufficient space for visitors as a welcome addition to Bakewell accommodation offerings. Furthermore, the benefit to my own businesses, it will bring numerous visitors to the area who will be wanting food and beverage, a The same also applies to food operators, local visitor attractions and retail businesses. Further hospitality expansion comes with extended employment opportunities. The premises will require management, reception, administrative staff. In addition to potential food and beverage assistance, this is due to the addition of a potential coffee shop to provide food and beverage to hotel guests. Housekeeping roles benefit many parents as the hours of work and flexibility often coincide with the school day. This encourages parents back into the workplace. Apart, hotels often have a shorter stay period than typical holiday lets, and therefore this offers more labour hours to local employment and more frequent turnarounds. As a new build, the opportunities are endless in complying with modern day visitor needs. Many pubs, hotels and other B&Bs are old buildings unable to support large structural changes. In the entirety of the Peak District's accommodation, according to Accessible Derbyshire, there are only 3 properties within the whole national park that accommodate guests in wheelchairs. Potential property has the ability to add more, as well as catering for many other accessible needs. Likewise, for sustainability, according to ZapMap, there are only 8 accommodation providers in the national park that offer EV charging units. This is not only poor for sustainability, but it will detract EV users to the area. With ample parking, the possibility of marketing this great offering is massive. Whilst this unit may not fulfil employment criteria to which planning was originally granted, new potential will transform the land, offer employment opportunities, and greatly contribute to the local economy. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. I wonder whether you could just ask one question for me. How many people would you expect this development to employ? And how many of those would be full and part-time jobs, if you see what I mean?
Overall, it depends on who we can find, and obviously it just depends. I think full-time equivalent would be looking at 20 plus employees.
Full-time equivalent?
Full-time equivalent.
Okay. Thank you. Right. Alex Cotton, I think, made the case that's going to be put against us at appeal, if I can understand what she was saying. But she makes the point that we are told to avoid long-term protection of employment land, which I think is what part of the reason why we lost the offices down in the on the main road there. How do we respond? How do you respond to that point?
Well, it's clearly a strategic proposal in the development plan. There is a lack of high quality employment space within the national park. That was seen as an important lack when we created our core strategy, and it's been followed up by the development management policies. Mark's mentioned there's 14 of these sites. We've been trying very hard to create a mix of land use types in the national park because we don't want to see good employment land defaulting to housing potentially, which we know is important, but we actually need a mix of land uses in the national park. Very much acknowledge the great refurbishments and work that's gone on at the Ashford Arms we've approved recently. Bringing those uses back is great. The Maynard is fantastic quality. We've seen others of those, but we also need a diversity of employment space. And that's a point that's been raised by the District Council. They've objected to this. For that kind of reason, they've said that it would be detrimental to the wider business sector. And there's a fear that it would actually reduce, the wider access to employment space, workspace. So that's why it's there. It is difficult to try and safeguard, but if you look at that site, and actually members looked at it yesterday, there's a lot been built out within that sector. Those B-use classes sector, and it's one of the only places we can do that because those spaces aren't there in the national park. So that's the plan. That's the reason. That's the planning balance question that we've had to say here. The point about it being untidy is questionable. Bear in mind there's a landlord there, and why is it untidy? I would question. Actually, there's no need for that. There's a need to actually deliver on the long-term mix in the area. Bakewell is our only town. We've got a focus of employment uses there, and it's one of the only places we can do that. Interestingly, I think our policies have shown they're flexible enough to deliver for tourism uses in other places by virtue of redevelopment of other sites. members approved the site at Stone and Middletondale. We've got the Bike and Boot in the Hope Valley, which was a redeveloped pub site. Policies can do that. This is protected for another reason. I would just force that point.
I totally understand all the arguments you've just put, but I'm trying to get to the answer to the specific point that Ms. Cotton raised, which is that we've been told to avoid the protection, the long-term protection of employment land.
That point was made at the examination in 2018-19 on the Development Management Policies document, and it was accepted. The inspector accepted that there was a lack of overall mix for employment space in the National Park and accepted it. So I think it's an exception that's been made, and it's something we need to make a decision as to whether to hold out on, because over time this mix of uses will be important.
Is there any sort of feel or experience of what is meant by long-term protection? I mean 20 years is clearly...
The MPPF, that's the start, the end of that sentence is where there's no realistic prospect of it coming forward. So the long-term protection per se isn't restricted or advised against by the framework. It's where there's no prospect of that coming forward for other uses, or that it's unlikely to come forward for the uses that it's been protected. That's the case that we haven't accepted as officers, based on the information that's available to us. The strategically, regionally, the advice, not just from 2016, there's an updated report that the District Council have carried out, which is referenced in this report as well, suggests there is still a need for this type of land in the locality. So our view is that there is still a reasonable prospect of this land coming forward for those uses in the future, and that's why we still think it's reasonable, and that would be the case at appeal.
And it doesn't have to be offices, of course.
Absolutely. It's not just B1 use, which is what we understand it's been marketed as, although it may have been marketed for other uses. We don't have any evidence of that. But yeah, you're right, it's not just office use. It could also go into light industrial or storage and distribution use within the permission that already exists for the site.
Right, that's helpful. Thank you very much. Now, members. Bill.
Thank you. I've listened very carefully to the arguments. We went to the site yesterday. I certainly moved to recommend to support the officer's refusal. This is clearly one of the very few sites that has been identified and allocated for these employment uses B1 to B2. The effect of losing this site or part of the site available will be moved pressure on other sites, I think, could well have sort of bigger or big landscape value, and so that would be effective. So pressure will be put on the purposes of the park in that sense. And I think it's actually good having some flexibility, because when businesses need that site, there is availability to react and say, yes, here is the site, and to be able to react to future demand. I mean, the world's changing very rapidly. We don't know quite what's going to happen in the next year or two, but that is something that can be held in reserve, and I think is a very good thing. I'm also aware that the hotel is located, it sort of follows the pattern that I think probably started in France, of hotels being located in industrial estates, and then more so it certainly happens here in the UK now a lot. But it's a very unsustainable way of looking at holiday accommodation. If you stayed at that hotel, you will almost certainly arrive by car, and you will leave by car, even to visit Bakewell. Bakewell is not a particularly pleasant or easy walk in. I think Aldi's quite close, but apart from that, people were using the car all the time. And I think we, as an authority and as a community and as a nation, need to really think about sustainability on things like that. There will be a lot of people who will want to travel by public transport, or perhaps only travel by public transport, and that site is quite difficult to get to by public transport. So I think that is a really important factor in the location of that. And I note that both the George and the Maynard are really in settlements and have relatively good, for the Peak District, public transport links, are both within walking distance of a rail station. I think we do need to plan ahead for a more sustainable world, and I think just having a hotel there would just just recreate the situation where everyone's travelling to the Peak District in their cars. I'm concerned that the development could become holiday accommodation or second homes, and in the event that the application is approved, there should be conditions to prevent that. I'm not convinced, as someone who used to work as a town planning consultant, I always used to talk about the employment opportunities and inflate them. So I'm really not, I can't see where the 20 full-time equivalent jobs come from to a place which is relatively self-sufficient. And I'm not sure the coffee shop that wasn't in the application. Is it the?
No, the applicant put that. Sorry, it's working. The applicant put that forward earlier this week,
Right.
and we didn't accept those amendments due to the late submission.
Yeah. Okay. And finally, there's a question that the site as an eyesore is completely irrelevant. I mean, that looks bad on the owner and the landowner, and that shouldn't be a reason to develop it at this stage. It's not relevant. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members? Ken?
Thank you, Chair. Excuse me. I had a phone call this morning that put to me the case for potential support of this application in the context of the majority of development that has happened recently, industrial and similar, has occurred on the other side of the road, the A6, down beyond Aldi, behind Arkwright's Mill. And that therefore that was the area to which all the industrial development, in inverted commas, has gone, and that therefore this site was surplus to requirement. I'd be interested to know from officers in a moment whether there is any indication of impact from the developments that have occurred down by the riverside on the potential for using this site. And that's one of the reasons perhaps why its use has been slowed down, or its attraction hasn't materialised. The other point that was made to me was that the provision of holiday accommodation would ease the impact of Airbnb and similar holiday lettings in Bakewell. And I wonder whether there's any indication, whether we have any knowledge of the extent to which that impacts, those lets impact on Bakewell, and therefore the extent to which this would either alleviate some of that pressure or, as we've heard, attract more people to the area when we've been looking at ways of managing our existing tourism in flux rather than encouraging more people specifically into the Peak District. So those are a couple of questions which I'd appreciate some responses to, if possible, before I go on to another point.
Very good questions too.
Thank you.
I'll take the first one in terms of the impacts of the site you're referring to as the Riverside site, as you say, behind Aldi and behind Arkwright Mill down there. Obviously, we don't have access to information about the commercial interests of those parties, and as a result, we can't know the impact that might have had upon this existing site. They clearly are sites of different character, just from being on them. There's a mix on the Deepdale site. There is quite a lot of office provision there that isn't available across on the Riverside site, which is much more larger scale industrial buildings. That site's had permission now for a number of years to be effectively, it was already, of course, an existing business site, but to be redeveloped and improved. And over the last 2-3 years particularly, you'll have seen very large new buildings going up there and being occupied. Where, if anything, that just, to me, emphasises that there is a demand for uses of this type within Bakewell. Those units there's another one going up at the moment. The site is being built out in full. There's a whole raft of different units that comprise that site, and the owner is sequentially working through the site, developing them out and getting them occupied. So there isn't, or wouldn't appear to be, a shortage of demand for units within these use classes. But I can't comment on the impact of that site upon this one, of course.
There may be a market thing there, though, because the site across the way will take big units.
Quite.
And this is quite a small.
And
yeah.
It's a different provision,
Yes,
in fact.
yeah.
It does lead on to the issues around strategic provision as well, for my mind. Is that it's a kind of question of I know it's a how long is a piece of string question in a way, but how long is strategic? And, you know, we've only got 14 sites across the national park that are reserved for this kind of employment. And it does seem to me that if we begin to lose them, then we begin to lose that long-term strategic stockpile, as it were, of facilities. I can see the case from both sides. I can see that there is an opportunity, and full marks to people for identifying a particular opportunity, but it does seem to me, particularly in light of the the other point I've just remembered, one of the issues papers for the development of the new local plan was to do with business provision, and the feedback from businesses was that there was more provision required than existed, if I remember rightly. It does seem to me that it would be short-sighted to lose what we already have when some of the feedback from business is that we actually need more. Now, I know that do we need more than is already there was questioned, but only in the context of what we have is sufficient provision, rather than we can afford to lose some because we've got far too much. So I think whilst I have had my ear bent about supporting the application, I do feel that strategically we need to support the officer recommendation, Chair.
Can I just clarify that? I think we were told by one of the speakers, I think it might have been Miss Compton again, that there was an over-provision somewhere. Could you clarify that for us? Well, somebody in one of the introductions, I don't know who it was, I think it was you, made some point about I've written down very roughly surplus in the area. Yeah, I've got it from if you'd like to come to the microphone and...
Yeah, it was from the Bakewell Employment Land Retail Review. The first section in the summary and policy bit said they identified a need for 1.3 hectares for employment land. And then, let me just find it. And then at the end, 10.6, our analysis of employment site supply has identified potentially an additional 2.3 hectares of employment land across the town. So the need for 1.3, the availability of 2.3.
Thank you. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, the main thing I would say is that Bakewell is a strategic location, and you can't just think about it in a Bakewell sense. You know, we haven't got much of this land in the national park, so actually it serves a wider area.
To pick up Bill's point, all coming by car. Yes, thank you very much. Jean.
Thank you, Chairman. I do take on board the comment of the District Council. It's detrimental to the wider business sector if this unit goes. But as I say, it's not being fully used. So why is it not being fully used? And I've took on board what the speakers have said, that it's an improvement to the area. It'll support tourism coming to the Peak District. There'll be local employment. It'll improve disability facilities for people coming into the Peak District, which sounded really low with what was provided. The EV charging units, getting very popular at the moment. People are using those. I would like to approve this application. I think it'll be an asset to the area. I do take on board the other comments of everybody that said that we need this area, but why is it not being used? Why is it empty?
Right. I think what I need is a vote. Have we got a proposal? Well, I don't think anybody's actually proposed, have they? Does anybody have a proposal? Right, Jean's putting her... Okay, is that seconded?
With conditions that have been mentioned.
Well, we'll come on to conditions shortly. Is that seconded? I don't think it is. So can I have an alternative idea put forward by somebody?
Support the officer's recommendation for refusal.
Okay. Is that seconded? Thank you, Lee. Any amendment to that? In that case, I'm going to have to put that to the vote as it is now. All those in favour? Yes. Anyone against? One against. Abstaining? Right. Difficult one. Right. Yes, we're just past 1 o'clock. Well, we better. We have speakers, I think, for the next one, don't we? Yes, I think we have to. Members, it is 1 o'clock. We have the barn at Parwich next. And are you Mr. Wright? No, he's not here yet.
This is Hugh Wright.
Is it? You're Hugh, Mr. Wright, okay. Are you content to continue and to try and deal with the two public participation items before we adjourn? Does anybody want a break? No? Okay. So will you agree that we move past 1 o'clock? Thank you. And we'll now move on to Hillcrest Barn, Parwich. And you're dealing with this one, Mark.
Thanks, Chair. There's just one correction to report, which is a typo at paragraph 24. The sentence should begin, the second letter raises no objection. At the moment, it's written as on objection. So just to be clear, the Ramblers Association don't object to the proposals.
And there's another one on the recommendation for refusal. It should read the proposed development.
Yes, instead of the proposal development, yes.
Okay. Thank you. Would you like to introduce it for us?
Yes, thank you. The application is for conversion of out farm to a dwelling at Hillcrest Barn in Parwich. And the application relates to a redundant agricultural building located in a field, as you can see on the plan on the screen, some 300 metres south of Parwich village itself. The building's in an elevated position within an open landscape. As you'll see as we go through, the building is mostly two-storey, but has 1.5 storey parts as well, and it's accessed via the line, a rough track that you can see outlined in red here on the application site. So the land rises from the access point off the highway all the way up to the application site. So this is that's probably a better one to start with. This is the block plan as it exists at the moment. So this is the building within the field parcel. And this is the layout as proposed. There are new dry stone walls proposed to each side, which, as you'll see when we go to the photos, again, at the moment the site's enclosed by a post and rail fence, but that's encloses a much larger area than is proposed here. Parking would be provided within the site with a small lawned garden as well. This is a photograph taken at the bottom of the access, so the light coloured aggregate you can see just behind the trees here, that's the start of the access there. This is part way up. You can see the building, which is called Hillcrest Barn for a reason. You can see it is cresting on the hill. From further up the access as it weaves its way up the hillside. And then there you can see the side of the barn and approach directly from the access itself. This shot shows the landscape beyond, so we're at this point we're looking roughly north-northeast. Parwich village is set down behind, which you can't see in this photo, you'll see in another, but you can see parts of it over here. There's the rear of the barn. As you can see, it's undergone some repair work. It's in sound condition. It's been repointed and it's been re-roofed, or had significant roof repairs at least in recent years. And the openings have been boarded and closed. And there you go, that's the end of it. So you can see Parwich village down to the side there, and this photo particularly shows the elevated and prominent position of the barn in the open landscape. These are views out of the site, again looking north-northeast. That shows the front of the barn with the existing openings. And this is the floor plan as existing. So you've just got a step up between the single storey and the 2-storey section. And you can see it's proposed for conversion into a 3-bedroomed property. So the layout has been reversed so that the living accommodation is provided at first floor, making use of the open hayloft, whilst the subdivision is at the ground floor, which serves to better conserve the internal interest of the building. And the existing southeast elevation proposed, you can see that it's working with the existing openings, just adding 2 new roof lights, and a small flue is shown through the roof slope as well. And the gable. To this side, you'll see better on the rear elevation plan. This is a stone stair, which is a new addition, but does reinstate. There was previously a stone stair to that side, so that's it's not an entirely alien feature. And the other gable, you can see the other side of the stair there too. And the rear, and there you can see the new stair, which would be a stone stair with metal railing. And in other regards, you've got new slot windows here to serve the living space with the roof lights as well. This is an air source heat pump that you can see, which would be tucked in behind the stone wall of the stairs. Sections through. So, as you'll have seen from the report, the application is recommended for refusal. The building is an isolated farm building in open countryside, and it's located some distance from the built-up part of the settlement of Parwich and from any other dwellings or buildings. The conversion to dwelling would introduce domestic elements into the landscape, such as bin stores, cars, garden furniture, washing lines, lighting, security measures, etc. The stone walling itself would be somewhat incongruous, just enveloping the building in an otherwise open field pattern. And the proposed site plan includes the creation of curtilage, including a meadow lawn and a large area of hard standing where the 2 vehicles would be positioned, and these would cause harm in the otherwise largely uninhabited landscape. If I go back to the site plan, I will just show you where the public rights of way are in relation to the building. So there's a public right of way which runs roughly along this line here. And then there's a further one that runs roughly along this line here. So the site is open to public views, not just in longer range views, but also in relatively close proximity as well. Because of these impacts of domestication in the landscape and harm to the agricultural setting of the building, the application is recommended for refusal as it's contrary to adopted policies in those regards, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We've got one speaker, Mr. Slater. Oh, it's Mrs. Slater. Okay, that's fine.
So we are here today to ask you to support our full planning permission for the conversion of an out farm to a dwelling at Hillcross Barn, Parwich. My husband's family have lived in Parwich for several generations. We lived together there with his grandma before moving into another property to start our family. It is also a central location between my family at Biggin by Hartington, my place of work at Fenny Bentley, Tom's elderly gran in Ashbourne, and Tom's family at Ryder Point and Wirksworth. We have 3 boys aged between 7 years and 2 weeks old. We currently live in a 2-bedroom rented property, so are in need to expand to a bigger family home. We would love to raise our family in Parwich, as Tom was. With having a young growing family and myself currently being on maternity leave, we couldn't afford a property in Parwich. Converting the barn would be our only opportunity. Tom acquired the barn as part of his inheritance from his late father. When we took ownership of the barn, it was in a state of disrepair. The external steps had started to fall down and the wooden roof struts rotting to the stage where the barn was starting to fall down. Not wanting to lose a prominent feature from the landscape, we undertook repairs on the barn, including re-roofing it to make it safe. We feel that converting the barn would ensure its future as a traditional feature within the Peak District. We are mindful of the visual impact on the landscape and as such are wanting to make as minimal changes as possible. The rear elevation of the property visible from the village is currently solid wall with no windows. What the report did not emphasise is that there was originally a yard with stone walls at the back of the barn where the curtilage is being proposed that we are looking to reinstate. This would hide domestic paraphernalia, such as cars and bins, therefore the view from the village would remain unaltered. We would then soften this with the addition of planting to finish the hedgerow already either side. The steps proposed were in situ until 2020. We're not proposing hard standing parking. An existing track is specified as chip-ins. Therefore, we can't understand why the landscape officer has objected to the steps and stone walls. The report doesn't mention the fact that all of the post and rail fencing would be removed. Despite what the reason for refusal states, the report concludes that the conversion scheme is sensitive and complies with policy. The appeal decision that is referred to by officers as being material is from 2007. This was under a completely different policy regime. There have been many appeal decisions on sites like this over the last 17 years that have taken a different approach to barn conversions, accepting that minor changes in the landscape character should be balanced against the benefits of saving these important heritage assets. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for us to create a new family home, live in Parwich, contribute to village life, and at the same time, save an important heritage asset. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you very much. Can I just take up the point that Mrs. Slater has just made? It was a quirk that I just noticed whilst we were looking at the plans about this, the original curtilage of this building. On the site, it was clear that there had been a lot of something or other there. I don't know what it is. But she makes the point that a lot of the objection could be overcome simply by reinstating what was there before. Has that been looked at and addressed?
Well, from our point of view, the introduction of a wall, and it is set out in the report, doesn't overcome the landscape concerns that we have. There is certainly an argument that the building has previously been enclosed. If you look on the photograph, you can see here the remnants of some of those walls and some of those gate posts. Yeah. We don't have the details of the exact layout of those, but our view that enclosing the domestic curtilage with a stone wall wouldn't overcome the setting and landscape concerns that we have.
Right. Okay. Members. Ken?
A question, Chair, if I may. It seems to be a day for questions from me. The curtilage that is proposed for this in this application is quite tight to the building, yet it's quite clear that an amount of material has been introduced to the site and levelled, going away from the building as we see it on this illustration, and is currently surrounded by a wooden fence, which I hear is proposed to remove, but it's rather like putting a smaller garden into a much larger garden. I mean, what is the relationship betwixt and between, and how is that going to be managed that it doesn't become part of the domestic curtilage of the property as is proposed?
The application site area is limited to what you can see there. So, in terms of what could be used lawfully as garden within planning control, it is that area bounded by the stone wall. I think it's a reasonable concern to raise, and inevitably the occasional use of that land wouldn't necessarily amount to a breach of planning control that would be enforced. The longer term use of that or adoption of it into garden, if we were aware of it and monitored, then obviously that would be subject to potentially to enforcement action. It would be a breach of planning control. Really, that's as far as I can go on that. And it's the same issue that we face on a lot of developments in the countryside, be those agricultural or residential conversions, is the risk of sprawl, and how well we can control that within planning controls.
And I suppose, Chair, that's what brings me on to the key point from my perspective, is the exposed location of the building, and I understand and sympathise with the need that people have quite reasonably to accommodate themselves and their growing families. But there is on occasions the point where, for me anyway, something is so exposed in the landscape that the prospect of it becoming a domestic dwelling it just seems to me to be inappropriate. I commend the family for the work they've done on the property. It's in fantastic condition, but having made those things almost in anticipation of an approval, it's not a guaranteed thing. I mean, the one view that you had on when I was asking about the expanded curtilage, if you like, of the gable end, the south gable, I mean, in the distance is Minninglow. It must be 1 kilometre or more away. It just gives an indication of the degree to which this location is visible across this part of the national park. And whilst we have on occasion from time to time approved developments that are in isolated positions, I think this is the most exposed that we have had come to committee in my time on committee. And I mean, given the backdrop of the hilltops behind Parwich, it is in such a location, as Mark said, Hillcrest, it's well named. I really can't support the proposal, the proposed development of this site, Chair.
Is that a proposal or? Okay, any other members? Bill?
Yeah, I support Ken's comments there. I mean, I think we have, and we've shown earlier on that we're very conscious of the needs of local people, local communities and families in the Peak District, but this is an exceptionally exposed site with which would have considerable effect on the local landscape. And I'm aware that it's an application for an open market house, isn't it?
No.
Is it? Sorry.
Is it open market? Oh, it's open market. Is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, so that doesn't address any local needs anyway. And I'm very conscious that it's not just because it's a residence. As we know, there's paraphernalia of residential use, including lighting, cars, waste disposal, outbuildings, greenhouses, washing lines, all the things that are legitimate as part of a residential property, and a large, probably a long surface drive, possibly with lighting. I'm also, just to carry on the point I made about sustainability, we should be looking to locate residential properties in settlements. Again, it's an isolated place where you would need a car to make every single journey, and we should, as a society, be moving away on absolute reliance on the car for every single thing we approve. And that's perhaps a minor point. And there was obviously concern about the engineering works, which you can see on the plan. It's to the northeast. I think it's defined by the one before. I think it's that circle to the northeast of the property. Yeah. Just going round. Yeah, it's that one. Yeah, so that area there, I think, pretty well has been levelled to create what would make a very nice garden extension. Whether it was lawned or treed or whatever. So it would, I suspect, be difficult to enforce. Should the permission be granted, and that would make the site even more prominent. In fact.
Are you seconding?
Sorry?
Are you seconding
Yes,
Ken's thing? Any other members? No. In that case, I shall take the vote. The vote is to refuse the application on the grounds set out in the report. All those in favour? Those against? One. And that is carried. Very sorry, Mr. and Mrs. Slater. The problem you have is that this is a national park, and there are duties that we have to go through to protect landscape and so on, which are very onerous, and I'm afraid this is just too far. If there's another solution you can come up with, I'm sure you could talk to officers about it, but I'm very sorry. We're on to agenda item 14, which is the NatWest Bank at Water Lane, Bakewell. Two applications, the application itself and a listed building application. We will deal with them both together. And who's dealing with this, Mark?
Thank you, Chair. As you say, this application for both listed building consent and planning permission. In the case of the listed building consent, it's for internal and external alterations to the buildings, and in the case of the planning permission, we're dealing with only those related to external alterations. And the external alterations amount to the removal of all fascia signage, with allowances being made for making good. Advertising to be removed from the building, the ATMs are to be removed and infilled to match the existing, and the night safe plate is also to be removed and infilled. Internally, and pertaining to the listed building consent only, there's removal of internal signage, marketing materials, fixtures, fittings, racking, IT equipment, security elements and furniture. So the site, which again I expect most members will be familiar with the location of, is on Water Lane in the centre of Bakewell. It's the junction of it with Rutland Square. Slightly clearer view. And this shows the building in question. So the signage that you can see here is to be removed, as are the ATMs that you can see along the wall as well. Lighting and security measures are also proposed to be removed, in the case of some of this by condition, to ensure that it goes in a timely fashion, because some of this is not subject to, it's not previously subject to listed building control, listed building consent rather. So the ATM would go, and stonework subject to detailing and samples to be agreed would match the adjacent wallings.
There are two ATMs. Are they both?
There are. This is the other one. Yeah, they're both to be removed.
Yes.
Signage would be removed as well. Any making good of stonework behind would be undertaken. Same for internal signage within windows, and the main fascia signage as well. Internally, there are some historic plaques which is slightly convoluted. They didn't form part of the application initially. Then they did. The Conservation Officer raised some concerns about them being removed. And as a result, they no longer form part of the application again. So they're shown here for information purposes, but those are not subject to removal as part of the application.
And those plaques are what? Are
They're
those all the memorials?
They're war memorial plaques. That's right.
They're not all to do with Bakewell, are they?
I don't know the answer to that, I'm afraid, Mike.
Okay,
thanks. The application has received comments from our conservation officers, and they have no objection to the proposals, subject to conditions requiring details to be agreed. And the application is therefore recommended for, in both cases, for approval, Chair. I would just note that a number of objections have been raised in relation to the loss of the use as a bank. That isn't under consideration here. There's no application for a change of use. The applications are purely for the physical works that we've just referred to. Thank you.
Is that it? Okay. Mr. Wright. That is on. Yes, thank you.
Can you hear me? Right, I have a cochlear implant, so I've used the induction loop, so just cut that off, so I don't hear myself twice or whatever, so to speak. Right. I'm Hugh Wright, being a Bakewell resident, and thank you for allowing me to speak on this occasion in connection with NatWest planning application. Three major aspects to address. One, no reference within the report to the Development Management Policy, DMS2, which is for the change of use of shops, community services and facilities, which is also dovetailed in with Core Strategy Policy HC4, provision and retention of community services and facilities. They are the same policies as for pubs under threat. Secondly, correct interpretation is required of Use Classes Amendment Regulation 2020, Class C, commercial, business and service. And then thirdly, no statement has been provided by the applicant on the viability of retaining its financial services as a material planning consideration. I question the conclusion drawn by the planning officer for points 71 and 74. For point 71, I dispute the statement. Therefore, while the concerns about the loss of the bank are understood, these issues cannot be given weight in the determination of this planning application. For point 74, I disagree where part of it states there is otherwise no conflict between the intent of policies in the development plan. The relevant policy, in my opinion, from the Development Management Policies document is DMS2, Change of Use of Shops, Community Services and Facilities. Under section 713 of the policy, financial and professional services are defined as a community service and facility. Parts of it further read, change of use is strongly resisted by core strategy policy HC4 Part C to protect the availability of facilities locally and to help the young, the elderly and those without access to private transport. Only where it can be shown that the facility is no longer needed by the community, that there is a facility available elsewhere in the settlement that will satisfy the same community need, or that the facility where the change of use is proposed can no longer be viable, will change of use be permitted. The use of a bank falls in a recently created use class E, commercial business and service, for the provision of the following kinds of services, principally to visiting members of the public, which list financial services as being one of its functions. Please note, this interpretation is just not limited to the applicant's bank-owned customers, but to the wider public being customers of whatever other financial institution that is in existence. A written submission is required from the applicant on its viability, since this is the last of its kind within Bakewell, as other comparable banks, of which there are at least 3 in the last decade. The applicant's submission must therefore demonstrate that either it is no longer needed, it is available elsewhere in Bakewell, or can no longer be viable as set out in core strategy HC4 Part C. It is clear and explicit to me that the members should not accept the recommendation as put forward by the planning officer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right. This application, members, is for some fairly simple work to the structure of the building, which we have to view simply as that work. This is not an application for change of use. Another bank could easily come in. It won't, of course, but it could come in, and if it wants to apply to reinstate all these things, it is able to do so. But we're not dealing with a change of use application. We're dealing with simply the merits of these particular proposals. I have to say, I'm very sorry that we could not, as part of this process, have done something more dignified in relation to the war memorials and plaques that remain in the building. This building could, under the use classes order, be put to all sorts of uses where their continued presence would be, if I may say so, inappropriate. And I think it's very unfortunate that we can't sort that out. But the application as it stands seems to me to be a very simple application for certain physical works to be carried out to the building, and it's on that basis that you must make your decision. Mike?
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate that the objector has come here with his objection to the bank's closing, and Bakewell is now the last place within the Peak District to lose banking facilities. But unfortunately, that is not what is before us as members here today. It's quite sad. When you look back over the last 20 years, almost every year there's been some application from NatWest which the planning officers have had to consider. You look back certainly from 1993, and every year there's been some change that planning officers have had to address. I don't think they've all had to come to planning committee. So it does reflect the end of an era and is happening all too frequently across the country, not just here in the Peak District National Park. Sheffield too has lost lots of banks, but we don't have quite so far to travel to reach others yet. So I'm going to move the recommendation, but before I do, just on the plaques, I am aware that we do have a museum in Bakewell, and I did wonder whether one or more of those plaques that are effectively war memorial plaques to those who served in and probably died in the First World War, whether there would be some ability for them to be transferred over to the museum, the Bakewell Museum.
Adam, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, but three of the memorials aren't listed, so they could be removed without, needing our consent. We can discuss that with the applicant. I think their intention, I don't know what their intention at the moment is, but what they normally would like to do is move that to an archive of their own, which wouldn't be in the national park. A better option for us maybe to have it in the museum. For the two plaques that are listed, my understanding was the applicant is considering putting in a separate application to remove those. So that may end up coming before us in the future.
Oh, good. That's reassuring.
Just thought with the local connection, it would be better if they could be seen
Absolutely.
by local people
No,
in
I totally
Bakewell
agree.
rather than tucked away in an archive which might not be seen by the public up in Edinburgh.
Yeah. Ken. Ken and then Dermot.
Just to say, Chair, one of the other hats I wear is that of Chair of Bakewell and District Historical Society, which runs the Bakewell Museum, and we'd be more than happy to enter into conversation with anyone who wishes to think about disposing of the plaques. They may not be appropriate, but we're quite happy to talk to people.
Dermot.
Thanks, Chair. I'm quite happy to second this one. I was part of a team of individuals that went down to NatWest, went to 10 Downing Street with petitions about the loss of the bank. I understand the objection, and sadly that ship has sailed. The only hope we have for the area is a banking hub, which I know there's a lot of work going on at the moment. But on what you said originally, Patrick, we have to judge it on the removal of these.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good. Any other members? It does amaze me, actually. I went to Launceston about 2 years ago. There were 7 extant, what I might call recognisable banks in the main square. I took some money out of Santander, which I have no idea where my nearest Santander is now. I now get regular updates from them as to when they're open and when they're not open. And I can't get a bank anywhere near me. I mean, it's just unbelievable. But we've got to deal with this application as it is. It's been moved, and both applications have been moved and seconded for approval. The planning application, all those in favour? Anyone against? No, that's carried. And the listed building application, all those in favour? Anyone against? That's it. I'm sorry about that, Mr. Wright, but we really had no choice. Okay. Members, we now have the enforcement report and the other report. I think probably, Andrew, before you get too excited, I think we could... Would anyone object to going and getting your sandwiches and just coming in and finishing the meeting, or would you like a quarter of an hour, 20 minutes break? Bring them in here. How do other members feel?
Yeah.
I haven't got any sandwiches.
Yeah. No, I agree. Yes, just 2 minutes, 3 minutes.
So can we reconvene in about 5 minutes' time and finish the meeting then?
I've got sandwiches either. I have to watch other people.
Convening at 20 to 2, and we're going to deal with Andrew Cook's report on planning enforcement. Over to you, Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be as brief as I can because I know you've had a long morning already. Nothing much to say really in relation to the report. It's all there in front of you, so obviously if you have any questions on the body of the report, I'll try and answer those. Just a couple of things just to quickly highlight. In paragraph 5 and 6, I've set out the additional progress that we've made on recruitment. So we're now very close to being fully staffed, which is really great news. That's probably the first time for about 4 years that that's been the case. So we're really pleased about that, and hopefully that will mean that we'll continue to improve our performance. The other thing I wanted to quickly highlight, just in relation to the figures, starting on paragraph 10, under workload and performance. So just to clarify, this is the annual report, so this summarises the what we've been doing over the last year. So we resolved 103 breaches in the past year, which, as you'll see there, is a significant improvement on the previous year, where we only resolved 70 cases. So that's a significant improvement already. And then in paragraph 11, I go on to talk about the backlog of cases which we've been addressing over the last 9 months. And that's a continuing process. So we've already reduced the backlog of cases quite significantly. So the number of cases overall now is back down to what it was almost in October 2017, when it was 521. It's still obviously a big number, we appreciate that, but it is very much reduced from what it was about 9 months ago, and as I say, we're continuing to address that backlog. And with the good news about recruitment, hopefully, as I say, that process will continue anyway, just in relation to the day job, as it were. Finally, the only other thing I wanted to highlight was in paragraph 14. So we've recently introduced a new form online for reporting alleged breaches of planning control. We're still currently allowing people to make those inquiries by the sort of conventional methods, by email, by phone, etc. But we are looking to try and move to a situation where we will only accept inquiries on the online form, and that will be in the near future. So you may potentially become aware of that from people that you come across who are perhaps concerned about having to submit inquiries only online. But if you could support us in moving that way, that would be really appreciated. I'll just move on to the photographs. I have got some photographs of cases that have been resolved. And then at the end, I'll just briefly summarise some changes that are coming up very shortly in the legislation around enforcement. But I'll just do the photographs first. So this is one that our chair will know quite well. This is land at Main Road, Taddington, an agricultural building, or a building that was erected some years ago now. It's been a long process in this case to get a resolution, but the building has now been removed, so that case has now been resolved. There was a planning permission granted in the interim for an alternative building, but that's not yet been built. This is a listed building in Monash. So this is what you might call relatively minor works, but it obviously is a listed building, so it's important in the context of that building. So this door was unauthorised and has now been replaced by that door, which is much more in keeping with the building. Similarly, another door at the side, that was unauthorised, has now been replaced with a fully boarded door. And the oil tank to the right of the photograph was at the rear of the building, and that's also now been removed. So that case has also been resolved. This is in Bakewell on Buxton Road. Quite a collection of signs and notices on the property, as you can see, on this shop, many of which were unauthorised, but that's now been resolved. As you'll see, possibly the shop has changed hands. It's now being occupied by a different tenant, so they've obviously removed the sign. So in that case, the change in tenancy has caused the case to be closed, but I think you'd agree that it's much more appropriate appearance, building in the conservation area, not listed, but in the conservation area. This is what was the Rising Sun Hotel near Bamford. The issue was the flag advertisements at the front of the property. But for those who haven't seen it, you might be interested to see that the hotel is now built and up and running. So we got the flags removed, but it's also, as I say, quite interesting to see the building operating. I think this might be the last one, possibly one more. So this was a air source heat pump, pretty ugly, as you can see, right next to the road. I believe this was in the conservation area, and that's now been removed. Sorry, there's one more. We haven't got an after photograph on this one, I'm afraid, so you'll have to use your imagination. But the summer house building that you can see, again, this is a listed building, Churchdale Hall, near Ashford in the Water. The summer house building was unauthorised, and that has now been removed. As I say, we haven't got an after photograph that's of sufficient quality to show you. So that's just an illustration of things that are happening perhaps in the background. A lot of those, you obviously get to hear about the big cases at Planning Committee, but all the time these other cases are ongoing in the background, obviously taking up time and resources to try and resolve.
If ever there was a place that was out of sight, out of mind, it was Churchdale Hall. How on earth did you find out about that?
I'm not sure. Often the case.
Can I go back to your new form?
Yeah, can I just...
Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say about these changes in the legislation,
okay.
and then perhaps
yes, please do.
take questions afterwards, if that's okay.
Please, that's fine.
Yeah, I just wanted to... Am I still... Yep. Yeah, there's some changes taking effect in legislation in a week's time, or just under a week's time, next Thursday. And I thought it'd be worth just giving you the highlights of those, because a couple of them are quite significant. Particularly the first one I'm going to mention, which is in relation to immunity periods. So you'll probably know that at the current time and for a while, the immunity periods have been 4 years and 10 years. So after that time, we wouldn't be able to take enforcement action if something's been in existence for that period of time. So at the moment, the 4 years applies to what we call operational development. So that's building work, essentially, or other physical works. And it also applies to the change of use of a building to a dwelling. So at the moment, if that was to be occurring for more than 4 years, then we wouldn't be able to take enforcement action. It would become immune. And the 10-year period currently applies to any other breaches, essentially, including breaches of condition. So it would be changes of use and breaches of condition. So what's happening next Thursday is that essentially the 4-year period is going, and everything is going to be subject to the 10-year period. So even physical works and changes of use to dwellings, changes of use of buildings to dwellings, will be subject to a 10-year immunity period. So that's quite significant. The other thing, well, a couple of other things worth perhaps mentioning. There's a new provision for something called an enforcement warning notice. This is essentially where we consider that there's a reasonable prospect that planning permission would be granted for the unauthorised development. We can issue one of these notices and it would specify a period for making a planning application, after which further enforcement action may be taken. So it gives them a deadline for making a planning application, and then we may take enforcement action after that period expires. At the moment, we do that anyway. We do that informally through letters or discussions with the offender. But this is a more formal way of doing that, essentially. So it'll be interesting to see whether that has any actual practical effect on the ground. The other thing is that temporary stop notices, currently they last for 28 days. That's being extended to 56 days. And we'll now also be able to issue temporary stop notices in relation to works to listed buildings, which we're not able to do currently. The last one, perhaps worth mentioning, is interesting. So where there's an enforcement notice appeal, there's a new power for the Secretary of State or the inspector who's dealing with the appeal to, in cases where the appellant is causing what's called undue delay, the inspector can warn the appellant and can specify steps to be taken within a specified period. So if, for example, there's something missing from there's some document missing from the appeal that's crucial to consideration of the appeal, then the inspector can ask for that to be submitted within a specified time. And if that doesn't happen, the inspector can then just dismiss the appeal. So that's quite a significant change. It'll be interesting again to see how often that's used and where that gets us. Okay, that was all. I thought it'd be interesting for you to hear about that because, as I say, those changes are coming into effect next week.
On that last one, I mean, how often is this delay in providing information an issue? I mean, it's not just enforcement, is it? It's planning appeals as well, presumably.
This only applies to enforcement notice appeals and appeals against refusal of a LDC, lawful development certificate,
but not to planning applications.
Not to normal planning appeals. No.
Right. Okay.
I think it's another way of trying to address the kind of prevarication and delay that's often, caused by appellants, offenders, to try and basically delay the inevitable.
Okay.
Would that help with Lytton Dale?
Lytton Dale.
Cresbrook.
Sorry, Cresbrook. Not in that case. We've never had an appeal in that case. So we issued the enforcement notice, but they didn't appeal. It only applies to appeals. Yeah.
Can I just go back to this new form we've got?
Yeah.
Will there be some very clear guidance on it about confidentiality of
yes.
People reporting and the degree to which we can guarantee that it can be kept confidential?
The short answer is yes, very much so.
Okay. Members? Bill?
Yeah.
And Mike?
Just briefly, I assume that the whole notion that it's very important to get a planning application, even where the authority will be minded to approve it, because that gives the opportunity to put conditions on, doesn't it? I mean, that's the key there, isn't it? Even though, yeah, so it's important that that's strengthened, that provision, yeah. Yeah.
Mike? Sorry, I thought you were going to get an answer. No, this was all to catch you out.
The backlog of enforcement cases, because I know it's been the backlog go up since 2017, so that's really well. On the online form, which is very welcome, obviously those who are very internet savvy will jump on it very quickly. Does it provide you with a map where you can identify where you believe your breach or planning breach is happening?
Yes, there is an interactive map where people can do that, can identify the site, because sometimes that can be the issue at the moment, is that we get a very vague description of where the location of the site is. So we can spend time or waste time looking for it or going back to the inquirer and trying to clarify it. So yes, there is a interactive map on the as part of the form.
Must use quite a lot of megabits. It's quite a big area, isn't it? You've got covered there.
Yeah. The other thing is that there's facility for people to submit, I think it's only a photograph at the moment, a single photograph with the form. I mean, if they have other photographs, they can send them on to us by email as well, but they can submit a photograph when they submit the form.
Dermot?
I've got one question.
Oh, sorry.
It did surprise me. You'll have to go back several pictures if you wanted to find it, but it was the door with the cap flap. And I just wondered what... Do we have an appropriate way for a cat flap to be fitted in a heritage door or a heritage building? Or is it?
I'm not sure if I...
Basically saying that we have to go back to the medieval times when the cat had to wait until...
I'm not sure if we've got a policy on cat flaps, but...
I just leave mine out, so...
If it's one of those clear plastic ones, it'll have to be double glazed.
Mike,
sorry, Dermot.
My cat insists on me opening the door, so that'd be fine, wouldn't it?
Let you know that no one's certain.
As somebody who uses a similar sort of reporting site at county, sometimes it's difficult for people to actually pinpoint exactly where they are. But there's this facility, isn't there? There's 3 words that you can get on your phone and whatever. I suggest if you could incorporate that as well into your new system, it would be very, very useful. We're encouraging county to look at that for the same reason that you're saying. Sometimes the descriptions people give are a little bit too vague. Thank you.
Yeah, just to say, we've already incorporated that into the form, the what 3 words. So, yeah.
Any other members in that case? Or will you? We are asked to note the report with thanks. All those in favour? Anyone against? No, thank you. And the last report is the latest position on appeals. And we've had another one since then, haven't we? Which will be reported to the next meeting.
Yeah.
But it's
so
a good one to report now.
We've got the Marquess of Granby lodged in that list as well. Yeah, and so it was the Wrights Farm at Kettleshume. Members might have seen.
Do you remember the one with the site visit that we did over in Cheshire?
Listed farm.
With the beautiful old listed farm and that... Yes. Yes.
Glass link, an extension to the rear of the curtilage building. So he appealed, that one's been dismissed, so we've won that one. Yeah.
Right. Any members got any further thoughts on this report?
Yeah, won the costs on that as well.
Sorry, say it again.
There was a costs appeal on that one as well, which has been dismissed as well.
Okay.
Very quick question. On the Marquess of Granby, it says committee. What does that mean? It's not something I've...
It went to the committee when it was refused.
It's where the decision was made.
Yeah. And a very long debate it was as well.
Yeah.
Right. It is to note, I'll move it from the chair. Seconded. All those in favour? Anyone against? No, that is noted. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Andrew, as well. And that's quicker than I thought it was.